Power doesn't break you when you lose it. Power breaks you when you realize you never truly had it at all. In the Empire of Varkane, where alphas rule like gods and weakness is a death sentence, one king believed he conquered the world. Then a girl with silver eyes walked into his throne room in chains and smiled. Not submission, amusement. And that smile destroyed an empire built on fear. This is the story of how absolute power learned to kneel. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop your city in the comments so I know my tribe is riding with me through this storm. The throne room of Blackthorn Palace stretched like a cathedral built for violence. Black marble columns rose 40 feet into shadow. Torches burned along walls carved with the faces of conquered kings. The ceiling disappeared into darkness, broken only by chains hanging from iron beams, remnants from when this chamber served as an execution hall before Theron Valicrest turned it into the seat of absolute power. The throne itself sat on a platform of obsidian steps, not gold, not jewels, just black stone polished smooth by centuries of blood and ambition. Behind it hung the banner of House Valicrest, a silver wolf tearing through crimson fabric. King Theron Valicrest stood before that throne now, not sitting, never sitting during court. Sitting suggested comfort. Comfort suggested weakness. He was 32 years old and looked like violence given human form. 6'4" of muscle earned through actual warfare, not training yards. Shoulders broad enough to carry armor for days. Hands scarred from swords, not ceremony. His face carried the brutal symmetry of northern bloodlines. Sharp jaw, prominent cheekbones, eyes the color of winter steel. Dark hair pulled back tight. No crown. Theron stopped wearing crowns 5 years ago after realizing fear worked better than symbols. His scent filled the room, pine and gunpowder and something darker. The alpha pheromone signature that made weaker wolves drop their eyes and strong ones calculate their chances of survival. Today, the throne room held 47 people. Royal guards lined the walls in black armor. Members of the High Council occupied the marble benches. Alpha lords from the 5 major houses, each one wealthy enough to buy a city, each one terrified of the man standing above them. Court officials clustered near the far columns, scribes and treasurers, and the countless parasites that fed on power. And in the center of that room, surrounded by guards, stood Celine Vera. She wore prisoner's gray, simple cloth that hung loose on a frame too thin from whatever hell she survived in the southern territories. Her wrists carried iron shackles connected by 2 feet of chain. Her feet were bare, dirty, bloodied. But her eyes, silver. Not gray, not pale blue. Pure metallic silver like moonlight given solid form. And those eyes held no fear whatsoever. Lord Cassian Dravik stood near the throne steps, holding the formal accusation scroll. He was 50 years old, wealthy beyond measure, and owned half the merchant ports on the eastern coast. His voice carried the oiled smoothness of men who never fought their own battles. Your Majesty, the accused stands before you charged with the murder of Lord Petrus Morven during the spring auction in Thornhaven. 3 witnesses confirm she used a concealed blade to sever his throat in full view of 24 alpha nobles. The evidence is irrefutable. Theron didn't respond immediately. He studied the girl standing in chains. She was maybe 22, 23 at most. Small even for an Omega, 5'5" in a world where genetics made alphas towering and Omegas delicate by design. Her hair fell in tangled black waves to her shoulders. Her face carried a feral sharpness, high cheekbones, full mouth, a scar above her left eyebrow. But what struck Theron was her posture. Most prisoners stood before him trembling, begging, broken by the mere weight of royal authority. Celine stood like she was watching a performance she'd seen 100 times before and found mildly entertaining. Theron descended 3 steps. The movement made guards stiffen. The council members leaned forward. "You killed an alpha noble," he said. His voice carried across the chamber like a blade drawn from a sheath. "During a legal auction sanctioned by Southern territorial law." Celine's expression didn't change. "I did. No denial, no excuses." The court rippled with whispers. Theron descended another step. Lord Petrus Morven owned 16 ships, employed 3,000 workers. His family held the eastern trade routes for 4 generations. You ended that bloodline with a kitchen knife. Celine's eyes tracked him like a predator watching another predator circle. He thought purchasing me gave him ownership of my survival, she said. Her voice was rough, unpolished. The accent of someone raised in territories where law was a suggestion and mercy was a fairy tale. He was mistaken. The whispers grew louder. Lord Cassian's face reddened. She admits it, Your Majesty. The girl confesses to cold-blooded murder and shows no remorse. The law demands immediate execution. Theron raised one hand. Silence fell instantly. He was now only 5 feet from Celine, close enough to smell the road dust on her skin, close enough to see the tension in her jaw, close enough to catch something most people missed. She wasn't fearless. She was practiced. The girl knew how to hide terror beneath performance, how to turn vulnerability into a weapon by refusing to show it. Theron recognized that skill immediately because he built an empire using the exact same strategy. Why did you kill him? Theron asked quietly. Celine's eyes met his without flinching. Because he thought owning me made him untouchable. The throne room went absolutely silent. Not the nervous silence of people waiting for violence. The stunned silence of people hearing someone speak a truth they all knew but never voiced. Theron stared at the girl in chains and felt something shift inside his chest he didn't recognize. Not attraction? Not yet. Recognition. For the first time in years, Theron stood before someone his presence couldn't intimidate. Someone who looked at absolute power and saw just another traumatized predator pretending brutality equaled strength. He straightened, turned toward the council. The investigation will continue under palace authority. Confine her to the East Tower until we establish full context. Anyone who speaks to her without my direct permission will lose their tongue. The court erupted. Lord shouted protests. Cassian nearly dropped his scroll. Your Majesty, she confessed. I'm aware, Theron said without raising his voice, but Southern territorial law operates outside traditional jurisdiction. If Lord Petrus purchased an Omega through illegal channels, his death becomes property dispute, not murder. I will not execute a woman based on incomplete evidence. Is that unclear? Every mouth shut. Theron never threatened, never postured. He stated facts and let fear do the rest. Guards moved forward to escort Celine. She didn't resist, didn't speak. But as she turned to leave, her eyes found Theron's one last time, and she smiled. Not grateful, amused. Like she knew exactly what he was doing and found his performance transparent. That smile haunted Theron for the rest of the day. The East Tower occupied the oldest section of Blackthorn Palace. 300 years ago, it housed foreign dignitaries. Then prisoners of war. Then nothing after Theron's father declared it structurally unsound and abandoned it to dust and silence. Theron had it cleaned and furnished in 6 hours. Not luxury, just basic necessities. A bed, a table, a small bathing chamber, windows that overlooked the palace training yards and the city sprawling beyond the walls. No chains, no guards inside the room. Celine stood at the window when Theron entered that evening. She'd bathed, changed into simple dark clothes his staff provided. Her hair was clean now, falling in waves that caught the sunset burning across Varkane's western sky. She didn't turn when the door opened, didn't acknowledge him at all. Theron closed the door behind him, stayed near it, 7 feet of space between them. Most people flinch when I enter a room, he said. Celine's reflection appeared in the window glass. Those silver eyes found his. Most people don't know what actual monsters look like. Theron's jaw tightened. You think I'm pretending? I think you're exhausted, Celine said, still facing the window. Running an empire through fear is like holding water in your fists. The harder you grip, the faster it drains. You've been gripping so hard for so long you forgot what you're even holding anymore. The observation cut deeper than any blade. Theron moved closer. 5 feet now. You murdered an alpha noble. That's not philosophical debate. That's treason against the natural order. Celine finally turned, looked at him directly. The natural order, she repeated slowly. You mean the system where omegas get sold like livestock while alphas pretend genetics justify slavery? That natural order? Her voice carried no anger, just factual observation, which somehow made it worse. Theron's hands flexed. I didn't create this world. I inherited it. But you maintain it, Celine said. Every brutal decree, every execution, every time you crush rebellion instead of questioning why people keep rebelling. You maintain a system built on control and call it order. Then you wonder why everything feels hollow. Theron was suddenly very close to her, too close, near enough to catch the scent of soap on her skin and something underneath. Lavender, maybe. Or something wild. You know nothing about running a kingdom. I know exhaustion when I see it, Celine said softly. I know what it looks like when someone builds walls so high they forget what they were protecting in the first place. You conquered 3 kingdoms, King Theron, but you're still terrified of losing control for even a second. That's not strength. That's survival instinct from someone who never felt safe. Theron's entire body went rigid. No one spoke to him like this. No one dared. And yet he didn't order her silenced, didn't call guards, didn't retreat, because she was right. And Theron Valicrest hadn't heard genuine truth in so long he almost forgot what it sounded like. Why aren't you afraid of me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Celine's expression softened. Not pity. Something closer to understanding, because you're not the most dangerous thing I've survived. They stood there in the fading light, king and prisoner, Alpha and Omega. 2 people circling recognition neither wanted to name. Finally, Theron stepped back. You'll stay here until the investigation concludes. Don't mistake this for mercy. It's political calculation. Of course, Celine said. Her tone suggested she didn't believe him for a second. Theron reached the door. Stopped. What happened in the Southern Territories? Celine turned back to the window. The same thing that happens everywhere. Powerful men think ownership equals consent. I survived. They didn't. Theron left without another word, but he came back the next night, and the night after that. The palace began changing in ways no one could quite articulate. It started small. A servant bringing Celine books she didn't request. Guards outside her tower speaking more quietly. Kitchen staff sending higher quality meals than standard prisoner rations warranted. Then members of the High Council noticed the king visiting the East Tower every evening. Lord Cassian cornered Theron in the war room 3 days after Celine's arrival. Your Majesty, the girl is a distraction. The council grows concerned about your repeated visits. It suggests weakness. Theron didn't look up from the territorial map spread across the table. I'm conducting an investigation personally. That's thorough leadership, not weakness. The investigation could be handled by magistrates. Could be, Theron agreed, but I prefer direct assessment. Cassian's jaw worked. The girl is dangerous, Your Majesty. She possesses unnatural influence. Servants whisper about her. Guards ask questions about Southern law. Even Lord Marius was seen reading old Omega protection statutes yesterday. This is precisely how corruption spreads. Theron straightened, looked at Cassian directly. Tell me something, Lord Cassian. If one unarmed Omega in chains can corrupt my entire palace in 3 days, what does that suggest about the foundation I built? Cassian paled. I didn't mean... You did, Theron said quietly. You meant that her mere existence threatens everything we stand for, which means everything we stand for is fragile enough to break from exposure to one honest voice. Is that what you're suggesting? No, Your Majesty. Good. Because if my empire can't withstand one girl asking uncomfortable questions, then I built something worthless. Theron returned to his maps. Cassian retreated. But the Lord's words stayed with him, unnatural influence, as if truth was a contagion. That night Theron brought reports to Celine's tower instead of studying them in his chambers. He told himself it was efficiency, privacy, strategic thinking away from political pressure. The truth was simpler. Conversations with Celine felt like breathing after years underwater. She sat at her small table reviewing one of the books someone left her. History of the Northern Campaigns, Theron's own military victories documented in careful script. Find any errors? He asked from the doorway. Celine looked up, smiled faintly. Several. But they're flattering errors, so I assume they're intentional. Theron stepped inside, set his reports on the corner of her table. Such as... Celine turned pages until finding the passage she wanted. Here, the Siege of Greystone. The report claims you starved out the defenders over 3 months until they surrendered from desperation. Very noble, very strategic. That's accurate. It's incomplete, Celine said. It doesn't mention you poisoned the water supply in week 2, or that you sent infected corpses over the walls using catapults to spread disease. The surrender came because you turned starvation into plague. Efficient, brutal, but the history book calls it a bloodless victory. Theron's expression hardened. Who told you that? No one. I can smell propaganda from 100 miles away. Every empire writes history to make cruelty look like wisdom. She closed the book. Met his eyes. You're not a brilliant strategist, King Theron. You're a traumatized survivor who learned that overwhelming violence prevents future violence. So you crush everything that moves and call it peace. Theron grabbed the edge of the table. You think you understand me after 3 conversations. I think I recognize the aftermath of survival, Celine said quietly. The way you never sit during court. The way you position yourself near exits. The way you test everyone around you constantly to see who flinches first. Those aren't leadership tactics. Those are trauma responses. Theron's breathing changed, faster, harsher. My father was weak, soft. He believed in diplomacy and compromise and every other fantasy that gets kings killed. When I was 16, 3 rival houses invaded simultaneously during the winter. They burned our villages, slaughtered our people, dragged my father into the streets, and tore him apart while the capital watched. I survived by hiding under corpses for 7 hours. So yes, Celine, I learned that violence prevents future violence, because mercy gets you killed. Celine stood, moved closer. I'm not criticizing survival. I'm asking what happens when you survive so hard you forget what you're surviving for. Theron stared at her, this girl who walked into his empire in chains and somehow saw through every defense he spent decades building. What happened to you? He asked. In the South. Celine's expression shifted. Something old and wounded moved behind those silver eyes. The same thing that happens to every Omega born without protection. I was sold when I was 14, bought when I was 15, traded 6 times before I turned 20. Along the way, I learned that men who think ownership equals control always make the same mistake. What mistake? They assume the owned aren't paying attention, aren't learning, aren't waiting. She returned to the window. Lord Petrus was the 7th man who purchased me. He was also the 7th man who underestimated how much rage can hide behind submission. So when he tried forcing me into his bed after telling everyone I consented enthusiastically, I opened his throat with the same knife he gave me to cut his dinner. Then I walked out through the front entrance while his guards stood there confused, because powerful men never prepare for the possibility that property might fight back. Theron felt something crack inside his chest. Not horror. Recognition. Because he understood violence born from survival better than anyone. Why turn yourself in? He asked. You could have disappeared. Celine looked back at him. I was tired of running, tired of hiding. If I was going to die, I wanted to die standing in front of the most powerful alpha in the 5 kingdoms, looking him in the eye and daring him to prove he was different. Are you? She asked quietly. Different. Theron had no answer, so he left. But the question followed him through every corridor, every strategy meeting, every decree signed in blood and justified by necessity. Are you different? He didn't know anymore. The Blood Moon Summit approached like storm clouds gathering. Every major alpha ruler from across the 5 dominions would arrive at Blackthorn Palace for 3 days of political theater disguised as diplomacy. Military alliances, trade agreements, territory negotiations, the yearly ritual where powerful men measured their authority against each other and pretended civilization prevented outright war. Theron hated the summit, but he was too powerful to refuse hosting without suggesting weakness. The palace transformed into performance space. Servants hung banners from every wall. Kitchens prepared feasts for 500 guests. The throne room was polished until black marble gleamed like dark water. And through it all, Celine remained in her tower, watching. Guards reported she spent hours at her window observing preparations, studying the guests arriving through the main gates, reading their postures and territories and hierarchies like someone analyzing a military deployment. Lord Marius approached Theron the morning before the summit officially began. Marius was the oldest council member. 63 years of political survival. Wealthy enough to be dangerous, smart enough not to challenge the throne directly. Your Majesty, we should discuss the prisoner. Theron didn't look up from the guest manifest. What about her? She cannot remain in the palace during the summit. Foreign rulers will view it as provocation. An Omega accused of murdering an Alpha noble, housed in luxury while judgment remains pending. It suggests weakness. She's confined to the East Tower. No one will see her. Everyone already knows she's here, Marius said carefully. Servants talk, guards talk. Half the visiting nobles have heard rumors about the silver-eyed Omega who killed Lord Petrus and somehow charmed the king into mercy. I showed no mercy. I demanded proper investigation. That's not what people believe, Marius said quietly. They believe you're compromised. Theron's hands went still on the parchment. Compromised. Marius chose his next words carefully. Your Majesty, I've served your family for 40 years. I watched your father rule through kindness and die screaming. I watched you rebuild this kingdom from ashes using fear and absolute control. You created something unshakable. But nothing compromises a king faster than appearing emotional about anyone. The moment rulers believe you care about something beyond power, they start calculating how to use that care against you. Theron stood, walked to the window overlooking the training yards. She's a prisoner under investigation. Nothing more. Then prove it, Marius said. During the summit banquet, when Lord Cassian inevitably demands judgment, execute her publicly. Show the 5 dominions that King Theron Valicrest serves justice, not sentiment. Theron's jaw tightened. You're suggesting I kill someone to maintain appearances. I'm suggesting you remember why this empire survives. Control is survival. Love creates weakness. Attachment creates graves. Your words, Your Majesty, not mine. Marius bowed and left. Theron stood at that window for 20 minutes, staring at the East Tower, where a girl with silver eyes was systematically dismantling every truth he built his empire on. The Blood Moon Summit began with ceremony that felt like orchestrated violence. The Great Hall blazed with 1,000 candles. Tables stretched the length of the chamber, each one positioned according to strict hierarchical protocol. Alpha rulers occupied the center positions, 9 of them representing the most powerful territories across the dominions. Their courts and generals and advisors filled the surrounding space. The hall smelled like roasted meat and wine, and the competing pheromone signatures of too many dominant alphas forced into proximity. Theron sat at the head table, alone. The empty chairs on either side were not oversight. They were statement. The King Alpha needed no equals. Lord Cassian sat 3 positions to Theron's right, Lord Marius to his left. The High Council arranged in descending order of influence. The meal began with the traditional toasts, elaborate speeches about unity and strength and the bonds between territories. Everyone lied smoothly. Everyone knew everyone else was lying, but the lies had structure, and structure prevented war. For 2 hours, it proceeded without incident. Then Lord Cassian stood. He was drunk. Not sloppy, but enough that his usual political caution had dissolved into arrogance. Your Majesty, Cassian began, his voice carrying across the hall, may I speak plainly about a matter of some concern? Theron's expression didn't change. You may, Cassian smiled, the predatory grin of men who mistake political safety for invincibility. I understand a certain Omega currently resides within these walls. The girl who murdered Lord Petrus during lawful auction. Many of us wonder about the delay in justice. The hall went quiet. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward the head table. Theron took a slow drink of wine. Justice requires complete investigation. I don't execute prisoners based on incomplete evidence. Of course, Cassian said smoothly, but the evidence seems quite complete. She confessed. Multiple witnesses confirmed the act. Delaying judgment suggests complications. What complications? Cassian's smile widened. Emotional complications, Your Majesty. There are whispers about your frequent visits to the East Tower, about servants reporting extended private conversations, about a king who built his empire on ruthless control suddenly showing unprecedented leniency toward a murderess. The temperature in the hall dropped. Theron set down his wine glass with perfect precision. Are you suggesting I'm compromised, Lord Cassian? I'm suggesting appearances matter, Cassian said. And currently it appears the great King Theron Valicrest can't decide whether to execute a criminal or claim her as mistress. Several nobles gasped. Others leaned forward hungrily. Cassian continued, emboldened by wine and audience. If your majesty finds the girl appealing, there's a simple solution. I'll purchase her myself. 20,000 gold marks, more than fair price for used Omega goods. I'll handle the execution personally, sparing your majesty the burden of appearing weak. We can finalize the transaction tonight. Silence. Absolute silence. Theron stood slowly. His movements were perfectly controlled, not rushed, not aggressive, just the deliberate precision of violence about to be unleashed. He walked around the table, descending from the platform, moving toward Cassian with the focused intent of an apex predator. Cassian's smile faltered. Your Majesty, I meant no disrespect. Theron grabbed Cassian by the throat and lifted him off the ground with one hand. The hall erupted. Guards rushed forward. Council members shouted. Foreign rulers stood from their seats. Theron ignored all of it. He held Cassian suspended, feet kicking, face turning purple, while every alpha ruler in the 5 dominions watched the king lose control publicly. You think you can purchase her? Theron said quietly, his voice somehow carrying through the chaos. Like property, like livestock. He squeezed harder. Cassian's eyes bulged. She is not for sale. She is not available. And the next person who suggests ownership of Selene Vera will lose more than their tongue. Theron released him. Cassian collapsed, gasping. The king turned to face the entire hall. The Omega in the East Tower is under my direct protection. Any action taken against her will be considered action taken against the crown. Is that unclear to anyone? No one spoke. Theron's eyes swept across the assembled rulers. The most powerful alphas in the world, all of them now recalculating their understanding of the man who just revealed his one weakness. The banquet is finished, Theron said. Get out. 300 people evacuated in under 5 minutes. Theron stood in the empty great hall surrounded by scattered wine glasses and abandoned meals, and felt his empire crack beneath his feet. Because kingdoms don't fall through military defeat first, they fall when rulers become emotional, when power becomes personal, when kings reveal they care about something more than control. Lord Marius appeared from the shadows near the far columns. His expression was careful, almost sad. You just showed them your weakness, he said quietly. Every alpha in that hall now knows Selene Vera can compromise you. They'll move against her, against you. This empire won't survive what you just started. Theron didn't respond. He was already walking toward the East Tower. Selene stood at her window when Theron entered. She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge the door slamming, didn't react to the sound of his breathing, harsh and ragged from rage barely contained. You heard, Theron said. The whole palace heard, Selene replied calmly. Stone walls carry sound better than people realize. Theron moved to the center of the room. His hands were shaking, actually shaking. I nearly killed him. In front of 9 rulers. I lost control because he suggested purchasing you like livestock. Selene finally turned. Why? The question cut through Theron's fury like cold water. Why? He repeated. Why did you lose control? Selene asked. Her silver eyes searched his face. You've executed people for far less. You've crushed rebellions without blinking. But Lord Cassian makes one crude offer and you try to strangle him in front of the entire summit. Why? Theron stared at her. The answer was there, bright and terrifying and utterly catastrophic. Because you matter, he said quietly. Because in 2 weeks you walked into this palace and destroyed every defense I built over 16 years. Because I look at you and see something I thought died when my father got torn apart in the streets. Because you make me want to believe power doesn't require cruelty. And that terrifies me more than any army. Selene's expression softened. Not pity. Understanding. You built this world, she said gently. Men like Cassian exist because kings like you allowed them to. You created a system where omegas are property, and alphas are gods, and violence is the only language anyone speaks. You can't be angry at Cassian for behaving exactly how your empire taught him to behave. The accusation landed like a blade between his ribs. I was 16, Theron said roughly. I watched my father die begging for mercy that never came. I learned that kindness gets you killed. that control is the only thing separating order from chaos. And what did that lesson cost you? Celine asked. How many people did you crush to maintain control? How many voices did you silence? How many times did you choose fear over humanity because survival felt more important than conscience? Theron's breathing was ragged now. Every time. Every single time. Because that's what survival demands. Celine moved closer, close enough to touch. Close enough that Theron could see the faint scars along her collarbone. Evidence of violence survived. Survival, she said softly, is what you do when you have no power. But you're the most powerful alpha in the 5 kingdoms. You're not surviving anymore, Theron. You're choosing. And every brutal choice you make maintains the exact system that destroyed you in the first place. Thunder cracked outside. Storm clouds gathered over Varkane's skyline. You don't understand, Theron said desperately. The moment I show weakness, the moment I appear compromised, rival houses will strike. They'll use you against me. They'll tear this kingdom apart. Then let them try, Celine said. Because right now you're not protecting a kingdom. You're protecting a prison you built around yourself and called it power. She reached up and touched his face, palm against his jaw. The first gentle touch Theron had felt in years. I'm not asking you to be weak. I'm asking you to be strong enough to question whether everything you sacrificed was worth what you became. Theron closed his eyes and felt something break inside him that he didn't know how to repair. Outside, the storm broke over Blackthorn Palace. Lightning split the sky. Thunder shook stone foundations. Rain hammered against windows like the empire itself was weeping. And inside that tower, a king stood before a girl in chains and realized he was the one imprisoned. The attack came 3 days later. Not assassination, coordinated military coup. 6 of the 9 ruling houses launched simultaneous strikes against Theron's authority. They moved fast, precisely, using the summit's presence as cover. Explosions tore through the palace's western wing at dawn. Guards loyal to the crown were slaughtered in their barracks before they could mobilize. Entire sections of Blackthorn fell to rebel forces within 20 minutes. Civil war erupted across Varkane overnight. Theron mobilized his remaining forces with brutal efficiency. The throne room became a war council. Maps spread across every surface. Generals shouted orders. Messengers ran between commanders. Through it all, Theron fought like a man with nothing left to lose, because he'd already lost the thing that mattered. Celine's tower was the first target they hit. Theron arrived to find the door blown open, guards dead, blood streaking the stone stairs, and Celine gone. The world tilted. Theron had conquered kingdoms, destroyed armies, survived impossible odds, but the sight of that empty tower shattered something in him no battle ever touched. Lord Marius found him standing in the doorway staring at the blood. Your Majesty, we have to move. The eastern gates are compromised. Rebel forces are pushing toward the throne room. Theron didn't respond. Your Majesty. Find her, Theron said quietly. We don't have resources to... Find her. The roar echoed through the palace. The command of an alpha who just became catastrophic. Marius paled. Yes, Your Majesty. Theron turned to face his guard commander. Mobilize every soldier, every scout, every spy we have. I want Celine Vera found within the hour, and I want the names of every house involved in this coup. His voice dropped to something cold and final. We're going to remind the 5 kingdoms why my father's mercy died with him. They found Celine in the ruins of the old market district. 3 rebel soldiers had her surrounded in a collapsed building. She was bleeding from a wound along her ribs. One of her wrists was broken. But she held a piece of broken glass like a weapon, and her silver eyes burned with the same defiance she showed in chains. Theron's forces tore through the rebels like wildfire through dead grass. He found Celine standing in the rubble, blood dripping from the glass still clutched in her hand. Their eyes met across the devastation. And Theron felt something fundamental shift in the architecture of his soul. He crossed the space between them, pulled her against his chest, felt her heart hammering against his ribs. You're alive, he said roughly. Celine's fingers gripped his armor. They wanted to use me against you, thought capturing me would make you surrender. Instead, Theron said against her hair, it made me burn the kingdom down to find you. Celine pulled back. looked up at him with those impossible silver eyes. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't destroy everything to protect me. Because if you do, then the monster's already won." The words landed like cold water on burning rage. Theron stared at her. At this girl who survived hell and still believed humanity was worth protecting. And he made a choice that would change history. The rebel lords were captured 3 hours later, dragged into what remained of the throne hall in chains, 7 of them, the architects of the coup, men who thought removing Selene would destabilize the king. They weren't wrong. They just miscalculated which direction that instability would move. The hall was destroyed. Half the roof collapsed. Blood stained the marble steps. But the throne survived. And Theron sat on it now, covered in ash and blood, looking like war itself given human form. The rebel lords knelt before him. Traditional protocol demanded execution. Immediate. Public. Brutal enough to discourage future rebellion. Every general in the room expected it. The entire kingdom expected it. Theron stood, walked down the steps until he stood before the first rebel lord. "You thought removing one girl would weaken me," he said quietly. The lord said nothing. "You were right. She does weaken me, because she forces me to question every brutal truth I built this empire on. Every execution, every crushed rebellion, every time I chose fear over conscience." He moved down the line. "My father believed in mercy, in diplomacy, in the idea that power could serve justice instead of feeding on it. And he died screaming while rivals tore him apart. So I became the opposite. I became the violence that prevents violence, the control that prevents chaos." Theron stopped, looked back toward where Selene stood near the broken throne. "Then a girl walked into my empire in chains and asked me one question I couldn't answer. What am I surviving for?" He turned back to the rebel lords. "I could execute all of you, eliminate your houses, salt the earth where your families stood, remind the 5 kingdoms why fear works better than mercy." His voice hardened. "Or I could prove that strength doesn't require cruelty, that true power is mastering the darkness inside yourself when destruction would be easier." Theron looked at each rebel lord directly. "You're exiled, all of you, stripped of titles and territories. Your lands will be redistributed to families harmed by this coup. Your names will be erased from every record. You'll spend the rest of your lives remembering that King Theron Valicrest was strong enough to choose restraint over revenge." The throne hall erupted in shocked silence. Generals stared. Council members whispered furiously. The rebel lords themselves looked confused, as if mercy was a language they no longer understood. Theron returned to his throne. "The war ends tonight. New laws will be written. Omega trafficking ends across all territories. Noble houses answer to crown authority, not bloodline privilege. And anyone who believes this empire runs on fear anymore will discover what happens when true strength replaces performance." He looked directly at Lord Marius. "Spread the word. The old kingdom died tonight. What comes next will be earned through justice, not terror." The hall slowly emptied, until only Selene remained. She walked toward the throne through scattered debris and bloodstains, stopped at the base of the steps. "You just changed everything," she said quietly. Theron descended until he stood level with her. "You changed everything." "I just finally listened." Selene's eyes searched his face. "What happens now?" "Now," Theron said, "we find out if an empire built on fear can evolve into something worth protecting. And whether a king who spent 16 years learning to control everything can learn to trust one person completely." He reached out, took her hand. "Starting with you." Selene's fingers tightened around his, and in the ruins of Blackthorn Palace, while storm clouds cleared over a fractured kingdom, 2 people who survived hell separately began rebuilding something together. Not perfect, not safe, but honest in ways that power alone could never be. The empire would never be the same. But neither would the king, or the girl who taught him that the strongest wolves are the ones brave enough to question their own teeth. The guard collapsed against the throne room door frame, chest heaving, blood dripping from a gash above his eye. Behind him, the pre-dawn sky over Varkane burned orange with distant fires. Theron didn't move. His hand remained locked around Selene's, fingers intertwined like they could anchor each other against what was coming. "How many?" he asked. His voice carried the flat calm of a predator calculating odds. The guard swallowed hard. "Reports vary. Your Majesty. Initial scouts estimate 15,000, maybe more. They're organized into battalions, they have weapons, siege equipment, and they're not raiders or bandits. He looked at Celine with something between awe and fear. They're calling themselves the Silver Legion. They say they're coming to collect one of their own. Celine's expression didn't change, but Theron felt her pulse spike against his palm. Where are they now? Theron asked. 40 miles south, moving fast. They'll reach the capital by tomorrow night. Theron released Celine's hand, walked toward the guard with measured steps. Send word to all remaining garrison commanders. Full defensive positions around the city walls. Recall every soldier from the eastern territories. I want siege preparations completed by sundown. The guard hesitated. Your Majesty, half our forces are still dealing with rebel house loyalists. If we pull everyone back to defend the capital, then pull them back. This takes priority. The guard bowed and ran. Silence filled the ruined throne room. Lord Marius emerged from the shadows near the collapsed western wall. His face looked older than it had 3 days ago. Exhaustion carved lines around his eyes. An Omega army, he said quietly. In all my years, I've never heard of such a thing. They shouldn't be capable of this level of organization. Celine turned to face him. Those silver eyes held no surprise, only grim recognition. You spent centuries teaching Omegas that submission was survival. You built an entire system designed to break us into compliant property. Then you're shocked when the ones who survived learned to weaponize everything you taught them. Her voice was cold, factual. Trauma doesn't make people weak, Lord Marius. It makes them dangerous once they stop being afraid. Marius's jaw tightened. Your Majesty, we need to discuss terms. If this army is truly coming for her, no terms, Theron said. But, Your Majesty. No. Terms. Theron's voice carried the weight of absolute authority, the kind that ended conversations without room for debate. He turned to face his council members as they filtered into the throne room. 7 of them. The survivors of the coup who remained loyal. Gentlemen, we have an army of formerly enslaved Omegas marching toward our capital demanding justice. Some of you will suggest we prepare for war. Others will suggest we negotiate surrender. I'm going to do neither. Lord Marius stepped forward. Then what do you propose? Theron looked at Celine, then back at his council. I'm going to meet them, alone, and I'm going to listen. The throne room erupted. Your Majesty, that's suicide. They'll tear you apart. You can't possibly. Theron raised one hand. Silence fell like a blade. For 16 years I ruled through fear, through violence, through maintaining a system that treated half our population like livestock. That system just raised an army against me. If I respond with more violence, I prove I learned nothing. If I hide behind walls and soldiers, I prove I'm exactly the coward they believe me to be. He straightened. So I'm going to walk out there, unarmed, and I'm going to face what I helped create. Celine moved beside him. Then I'm going with you. Absolutely not. She looked at him with those impossible silver eyes. They're not coming for you, Theron. They're coming for me. For answers. For proof that someone like them survived and changed something. You can't give them that. Only I can. Theron's hands clenched. If they want revenge, then they'll take it, Celine said simply. That's their right. But you don't get to protect me from consequences anymore. That's not love. That's control wearing a different mask. The truth cut deeper than any weapon. Because she was right, and Theron was finally beginning to understand the difference between protecting someone and caging them. They rode out at dawn, just 2 horses. No guards, no armor. Theron wore simple black leather. Celine wore gray, the same prisoner's clothes from her first day in Blackthorn Palace. The city watched them leave through the southern gates. Merchants, servants, soldiers who survived the coup. Hundreds of faces pressed against windows and lined the streets as their king rode toward potential execution. No one cheered, no one spoke. They just watched with the stunned silence of people witnessing something unprecedented. The countryside south of Varkane stretched in rolling hills covered in wild grass. Autumn had painted everything gold and rust. The sky was clear, cloudless, beautiful in the way mornings are right before everything changes. They rode in silence for the first hour. Theron kept his eyes on the horizon, scanning for dust clouds, signs of approaching forces. His body was tense, every instinct screaming that riding toward an army unarmed was suicide. But a different voice whispered underneath that instinct. Maybe that's the point. Maybe some debts can only be paid by offering yourself to the blade and trusting mercy exists on the other side. Selene finally spoke. You're thinking about your father. Theron's jaw tightened. How do you know that? Because you get the same look he probably had, right before they killed him. The look of someone choosing principle over survival. Theron pulled his horse to a stop, turned to face her. My father died begging, on his knees, surrounded by men who laughed while they tore him apart. His principles didn't save him. They just made his death slower. Selene stopped her horse beside his, but they saved something else. They saved the possibility that his son might become different, that 16 years of cruelty and control might end the moment someone reminded him what his father believed. Her voice softened. You're not riding toward death, Theron. You're riding toward the first honest choice you've made since you were 16, that terrifies you worse than any army. Theron stared at her. This woman who walked into his empire in chains and systematically destroyed every defense he built around his heart. What if they kill you? He asked quietly. Then you'll know I died free, making my own choices. Not property, not possession, just a woman who stood for something that mattered. She reached across the space between their horses, took his hand. But I don't think they'll kill me, because they're not coming for revenge. They're coming for proof that the world can change. Theron looked at their joined hands and felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of what strength actually meant. Not control. Trust. They rode on. Trust. They saw the army 2 hours later. It spread across the southern plain like a dark tide. Thousands of figures moving in organized formations. Banners rose above them, not house sigils or noble crests, just silver cloth snapping in the wind, the color of Selene's eyes, the color of defiance. Theron's horse shifted beneath him, sensing tension. His hands were steady on the reins, but his heartbeat hammered against his ribs. 15,000 soldiers, organized, armed, moving with the precision of people who learned warfare by surviving it. This wasn't a mob. This was an army that understood exactly what it was doing. Selene sat straighter in her saddle. Her face was calm, but Theron saw her breathing change, faster, shallower. She was terrified, and riding toward it anyway. That took more courage than anything Theron ever did on a battlefield. They rode closer, 500 yards, 400, 300. The army saw them. A ripple moved through the formation, soldiers pointing, commands shouted. The front line shifted, creating a corridor straight to the center, where a group of figures stood beneath the largest silver banner. Theron and Selene rode into that corridor. Soldiers lined both sides. Thousands of eyes tracked their approach. Mostly women, some men, every age from teenagers to people with gray hair, every face carrying the same expression. Not hatred, recognition. These were people who knew what it meant to stand in chains before power and choose survival over surrender. They reached the center formation. 7 figures stood waiting, 6 women, 1 man, all of them wearing makeshift armor, all of them armed, all of them carrying themselves with the rigid posture of people who survived hell and refused to break. The woman at the center stepped forward. She was maybe 40, tall for an Omega, scarred along her left cheek. Her hair was cut military short. Her eyes were the pale blue of winter ice. When she spoke, her voice carried across the plain like a blade scraping stone. King Theron Valacrest, the Wolf of the North, conqueror of the 3 kingdoms, the man who built an empire on our backs and called it order. Theron dismounted, kept his hands visible. Empty. I am. The woman's expression didn't change. My name is Commander Kaya Voss. I speak for the Silver Legion. 15,000 survivors of the trafficking networks your laws protected. Your nobles funded. Your system enabled. She gestured toward the army behind her. For decades, we begged for mercy, for justice, for the basic recognition that we were people instead of property. Your empire responded with silence, with violence, with laws that ensured our suffering remained profitable for the powerful. Kaya's eyes moved to Celine. Then we heard a story about a girl with silver eyes who killed her owner and walked into the most powerful throne room on earth without fear. About a prisoner who somehow changed a king built on control. She stepped closer. We came to see if that story was true, or just another fantasy to keep us docile. Celine dismounted, walked forward until she stood level with Theron. "It's true," she said quietly. Kaya's expression cracked. Something raw and desperate moved behind her eyes. "Then prove it. Show us the Empire changed. Show us King Theron." Valicrest is different than every other alpha who promised reform and delivered nothing. Silence. The weight of 15,000 survivors pressed down on that moment. Theron looked at Kaya, at the soldiers behind her, at the faces of people who survived systems designed to break them. And he made a choice that would define his entire reign. He knelt, not gracefully, not ceremonially. He dropped to his knees in the dirt before Commander Kaya Voss and the Silver Legion. The army rippled with shock, gasps, whispers, weapons lowering in confusion. Because kings don't kneel, especially not alpha kings, especially not before omegas. Theron's voice carried across the plain. "You're right. Every word. For 16 years I ruled through fear and called it strength. I built systems that protected predators and punished victims. I told myself survival justified cruelty, that maintaining control prevented chaos." He looked up at Kaya. "I was wrong. The empire I built is the same empire that destroyed my father. The same cycle of violence wearing different masks. And it took one girl in chains to show me what real courage looks like." His voice hardened with conviction. "I cannot undo the past. I cannot return what was stolen from you, but I can promise this. The old laws end today. Every trafficking network, every protection that shielded predators, every system that treated you as property, it burns today." He stood slowly. "I'm offering full citizenship to every member of the Silver Legion, land, resources, representation in the royal court. Your voices will shape the new laws. Your experiences will guide reform. And anyone who opposes this will answer to me personally." Kaya stared at him. The entire army stared. Because promises were cheap. Every ruler made promises. But kings didn't kneel. Kings didn't offer power to the people they spent centuries oppressing, unless something fundamental shifted. "Why should we believe you?" Kaya asked quietly. Theron met her eyes directly. "Because I brought the one thing you value more than promises. I brought Celine Vera, alive, free, unchanged by proximity to power. If I wanted control, I would have kept her locked away. If I wanted property, I would have claimed her. Instead, I brought her here, to you, to prove that some things matter more than maintaining authority." He stepped back. "She's not mine to keep. She never was. Whatever happens next is her choice." Every eye turned to Celine. She stood between the king and the army, between the empire that tried to break her and the soldiers who survived the same systems. Her silver eyes swept across the legion. "I spent years believing survival meant hiding, that safety came from being invisible, from never drawing attention, from accepting that the world was cruel and fighting back only made it worse." Her voice strengthened. "Then I killed the 7th man who purchased me, and I stopped hiding. I walked into Blackthorn Palace expecting execution. Instead, I found something I didn't expect." She looked at Theron. "I found a man so traumatized by power, he forgot what he was protecting. So afraid of weakness, he built an empire on fear. So desperate for control, he crushed everyone who challenged him." Celine turned back to Kaya. But underneath that armor was someone who remembered what his father believed. That power exists to serve justice, not feed on it. It took 2 weeks of conversations, of questioning, of forcing him to see the cost of every brutal choice. But he changed, not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely. She moved toward Kaya. "You want proof the empire can evolve? Look at what he just did. An alpha king kneeling before omega soldiers, offering power instead of demanding submission. That's not political theater. That's someone becoming different." Kaya's eyes searched Celine's face. "And you trust him?" Celine's answer came without hesitation. "I trust that he's capable of growth, that he'd rather face an army unarmed than maintain systems built on cruelty, that he values truth more than control." "Is that enough?" "I don't know. But it's more than any empire ever offered us before. The silence stretched. 15,000 soldiers waited for their commander's response. Kaya looked at Theron, at Celine, at the army behind her that survived hell and learned to weaponize everything stolen from them. Finally, she spoke. "We accept your terms, King Theron, but understand this. We're not returning to invisibility. We're not going to be grateful subjects who pretend the past didn't happen. We will hold you accountable. Every law, every reform, every promise. If you fail us, we won't beg for mercy again. We'll take what we're owed." Theron's expression was steady. "I would expect nothing less." Kaya extended her hand. "Then we have an accord." Theron took her hand, gripped it firmly, and history shifted. Not through war, not through violence, through the impossible moment when absolute power chose accountability over dominance. The Silver Legion began lowering weapons. Soldiers embraced. Some wept. Others stood in stunned silence, trying to process that they weren't going to die today. That maybe, possibly, the world actually could change. Celine stood beside Theron as the army began dispersing into camp formations. "You just shared power with the people you spent 16 years controlling," she said quietly. Theron watched the soldiers celebrating. "I spent 16 years terrified of losing control. Turns out the only way to keep power is knowing when to give it away." Celine's hand found his. "What happens now?" "Now," Theron said, "we go back to Varkane, and we start rebuilding an empire where power serves people instead of consuming them." He looked at her. "Together. If you want." Celine's silver eyes held his. "I spent years believing I'd never be anything except someone's property. Then you proved different, but here's what you need to understand, Theron. I'm not yours. I'm not anyone's. I'm choosing to stand beside you because I believe in what you're becoming. Not what you were. Not what you own. What you're becoming." Her grip tightened. "The moment that changes, I walk away. And you let me." Theron felt those words settle in his chest like stones. Not a promise of forever, a promise of honesty, which was infinitely more valuable. "I understand," he said, and meant it. They returned to Varkane with the Silver Legion traveling behind them. Not as conquerors, as citizens claiming space in an empire that spent centuries denying them humanity. The city gates opened slowly. Guards stared in disbelief as 15,000 soldiers entered peacefully. Merchants abandoned their stalls to watch. Children climbed walls for better views. The impossible was happening. The system was changing, and everyone could feel it. Theron called an emergency session of the High Council that evening. The throne room was still partially destroyed from the coup. Scaffolding held up sections of collapsed ceiling. Bloodstains marked the marble. But the throne survived, and Theron sat on it now with Celine standing to his right and Commander Kaya to his left. The council members filed in. Lord Marius, Lord Petron, Lady Severin, the survivors who remained loyal. They stared at the arrangement with barely concealed shock. And Omega, standing beside the throne, not as decoration, as equal authority. Theron began without preamble. "Gentlemen, ladies, the empire we knew ended 3 days ago. What we build next will be determined by choices we make in this room." He gestured toward Kaya. "Commander Kaya Voss represents 15,000 survivors of systems we enabled. She and her legion will have permanent representation in this council. Their voices will guide reform. Their experiences will shape new laws." Lord Marius stepped forward carefully. "Your Majesty, I understand the sentiment, but governance requires expertise, training. These people are survivors, not administrators." Kaya's voice cut across the chamber. "We survived networks you couldn't identify. We organized armies you didn't see coming. We learned to weaponize systems designed to break us. If you think that doesn't qualify as expertise, Lord Marius, then you don't understand what governance actually requires." Marius's face reddened. "I meant no disrespect." "Yes, you did," Kaya said flatly. "You meant we should be grateful for inclusion and stay quiet while you maintain control. That stops now. We're not asking permission. The king gave us authority. You'll either work with us or explain why you prefer the old system." Silence. Heavy and dangerous. Lord Petron spoke next. He was younger than Marius, 45 maybe. Smart enough to read shifting power dynamics. "Commander Voss, what reforms does the Legion prioritize?" Kaya moved to the center of the room. "First, Complete dismantling of all trafficking networks. Not just prosecution, dismantling. Every auction house, every contract allowing ownership, every law treating omegas as property. It ends completely. Second, legal protection for survivors. Any omega who killed their owner in self-defense receives automatic amnesty. No trials, no judgment, automatic freedom. Third, equal citizenship, access to education, property rights, legal representation. Everything alphas take for granted, we receive immediately. She looked directly at the council. Fourth, reparations. Every family that profited from trafficking pays into a fund supporting survivors. Not charity. Reparations for stolen labor, stolen lives, stolen futures. The council erupted. Impossible. The Treasury can't support. You're demanding we dismantle entire economic systems. Theron stood. Silence. The chamber quieted instantly. Everything Commander Voss described becomes law. Today. Anyone opposing these reforms can explain why maintaining slavery is worth destroying this kingdom. His eyes swept the council. Because make no mistake, the Silver Legion didn't disband. They're encamped outside the city walls. If we fail to deliver on promises made, they won't ask twice. They'll take what's owed, violently. Is that the empire you want to defend? No one answered. Lady Severin spoke carefully. She was the only woman on the council. 50 years old, survived 3 regime changes through intelligence rather than brutality. Your Majesty, I support these reforms, but implementation will face resistance. Noble houses, merchant guilds, every power structure built on the old system will fight back. Good, Theron said. Let them fight. Let them declare themselves publicly. Because anyone choosing profit over humanity marks themselves as enemy to this throne. He sat back down. Draft the legislation tonight. I want every reform formalized by dawn, and I want representatives from the Silver Legion involved in every stage. No decisions about them without them. The council members glanced at each other, processing the magnitude of what just shifted. Finally, Lord Marius spoke. As you command, Your Majesty. The tone said volumes, not agreement, compliance, which was all Theron needed for now. The council dispersed slowly. Guards escorted them from the chamber, until only Theron, Celine, and Kaya remained. Kaya turned to Theron. You realize half your council is already planning resistance. I know, and you're willing to purge your own government to enforce these reforms, without hesitation. Kaya studied him, looking for cracks, for performance, for the inevitable betrayal that always came from powerful men making promises. She found something else instead. Genuine commitment, terrifying in its totality. You're not like other alphas, she said quietly. Theron's expression was grim. I'm exactly like other alphas. Traumatized by power, addicted to control. The difference is I found someone who forced me to question whether survival justified cruelty. He looked at Celine. She taught me that real strength is choosing conscience over comfort. That true power is knowing when to surrender authority to people who understand justice better than I ever could. Kaya followed his gaze to Celine. She's extraordinary. Celine's voice was soft but firm. I'm not extraordinary. I'm just someone who refused to accept that the world can't change. Every Omega in the Silver Legion is the same. We survived hell and came out believing humanity still mattered. She moved toward Kaya. You're the extraordinary one, Commander. You organized thousands of people the Empire dismissed as broken. You built an army from survivors everyone assumed would stay silent. That takes vision the powerful will never possess. Kaya's eyes glistened. We didn't have a choice. You always have a choice, Celine said gently. You chose to fight, to organize, to demand justice instead of accepting scraps. That courage changed everything. The 3 of them stood in the damaged throne room. King, Commander, Survivor. 3 people who shouldn't have been able to trust each other, but somehow did anyway. The reforms passed within 48 hours, not without resistance. 3 council members resigned in protest. 2 merchant guilds attempted economic boycott. Several noble houses sent formal complaints to Theron demanding reversal. Theron responded by confiscating their properties and redistributing resources to the Silver Legion. The resistance stopped immediately after that. Within a week, the first trafficking networks were raided. 50 locations across the 5 territories. Auction houses burned, owners arrested, survivors freed. The Empire watched in stunned silence as the old order collapsed. Some celebrated, others mourned, but no one could deny reality. The world was changing, violently, rapidly, irreversibly. And at the center of that change stood Theron and Selene, not as king and subject, not as alpha and omega, as partners trying to build something neither believed possible. 2 weeks after the Silver Legion's arrival, Selene found Theron on the palace ramparts overlooking the city. He stood at the edge, hands braced against stone, staring at Varkane sprawling beneath star-filled sky. She approached quietly, stood beside him. "Can't sleep?" "Too much in my head," Theron said. "Wondering if this works, if reform happens fast enough, if I'm doing enough to deserve the trust people placed in me." Selene leaned against the wall. "You're thinking like someone who believes he has to fix everything alone. That's the old pattern, the control pattern." Theron looked at her. "Then what's the new pattern? Trust that other people can carry weight, that Commander Kaya and the Legion have skills you don't. The council members like Lady Severin want change too. That you don't have to be perfect, just consistent." Her hand found his. "Stop trying to control outcomes. Start trusting process." Theron's fingers tightened around hers. "What if I fail?" "Then you fail surrounded by people who chose to believe you anyway," Selene said. "That's not defeat. That's community." They stood in comfortable silence. Wind carried sounds from the city below, music from taverns, conversations from night markets, the ordinary noise of people living lives without constant fear. Finally, Theron spoke. "I never thanked you. For what? For walking into my throne room and destroying everything I built. For forcing me to question cruelty I called strength. For staying when you had every reason to leave." Selene's silver eyes found his. "I stayed because you proved capable of growth, because you chose evolution over comfort, because you'd rather face armies unarmed than maintain systems built on violence." She moved closer. "You're not perfect, Theron. You're still learning, still fighting instincts that scream for control. But you're trying, and that's what matters." Theron pulled her against him, felt her heart beating steady against his chest. "I love you," he said quietly. "Not because you're mine, not because I own you, but because you're the first person who saw me clearly and demanded better anyway." Selene's arms wrapped around him. "I love you too, but understand this. Love doesn't mean staying if you revert. If the old patterns return, if control becomes more important than conscience, I'll walk away, and you have to let me." "I know, promise me." Selene pulled back, looked up at him with those impossible silver eyes. "Promise me you'll let me go if I need to leave. That you won't cage me with love." Theron's throat tightened, because that promise went against every instinct. Every alpha impulse that screamed possession equaled protection. But he understood now. Real love was surrender. Real strength was trust. "I promise," he said, and meant it with everything he was becoming. They stood on those ramparts until dawn painted the sky gold and crimson. Two people who survived hell separately, building something together that neither could create alone. 3 months later, disaster struck. Not from external enemies, from within. Lord Cassian resurfaced. The man Theron nearly killed during the Blood Moon Summit, the Alpha who offered to purchase Selene like property. He'd been hiding in the Eastern Territories gathering support from displaced nobles, building a coalition of everyone who lost power during the reforms, and he returned with an army, 8,000 soldiers, professional mercenaries, well-funded, well-armed. They struck at dawn on the winter solstice, not at Varkane's walls, at the Silver Legion encampment outside the city. The attack was surgical, brutal, designed to shatter the symbol of change before it solidified. Explosions tore through sleeping quarters. Soldiers died in their beds. Commander Kaya survived by seconds, dragging wounded through burning wreckage. The message was clear. The old powers were striking back. Theron mobilized immediately. His remaining forces poured from the city to defend the Legion. But Cassian's mercenaries were prepared, professional, disciplined. The battle became a massacre. Theron fought at the front lines, sword soaked in blood, armor dented from impacts. His alpha pheromones flooded the battlefield with rage that made even his own soldiers nervous. Because he wasn't fighting strategically. He was fighting desperately. Every fallen Legion soldier felt like personal failure. Every scream reminded him that reform created vulnerability, that the old system was fighting back exactly as predicted. Celine found him in the middle of that carnage. She moved through the chaos with medical supplies, treating wounded, organizing evacuations. Her gray clothes were stained crimson, her face streaked with soot and blood. "Theron?" she called. "Theron." He turned, saw her standing 20 feet away surrounded by dying soldiers, and felt something fundamental crack. Because she was supposed to be safe, protected, away from this violence. Instead, she stood in the center of everything he failed to prevent. "Get back to the city," he shouted. "No, that's an order." "I don't take orders from you," Celine said flatly. "These are my people dying. I'm staying." A mercenary charged from Celine's blind side. Theron moved faster than thought, crossed 20 feet in seconds, intercepted the blade meant for her throat, killed the mercenary with savage efficiency, then grabbed Celine's arm. "You need to leave, now." Celine wrenched free. "Stop trying to protect me from consequences. This is what change costs. We both knew this. Fighting back means facing violence. I'm not hiding while people die defending what we built." Theron's control shattered. "I can't lose you," he said roughly. "I can't watch you die because I tried changing an empire that wants to stay broken." "Then don't watch," Celine said. "Fight beside me." She grabbed a fallen sword, held it with hands that knew violence intimately. "We survive this together, or we die proving the old world couldn't break us. Either way, I'm not running." Theron stared at her, at this woman who walked into his empire in chains and refused to be saved like property. And he made a choice that defined everything. He stopped trying to protect her, started trusting she could protect herself. They fought side by side through the rest of that battle, not as king and subject, as equals facing hell together. The fighting lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the field was soaked in blood. Bodies covered ground in every direction. Smoke rose from burning equipment. Cashin's mercenaries retreated. They'd done enough damage. The Silver Legion lost 400 soldiers, 30% of their medical staff. Commander Kaya took shrapnel across her ribs but survived. The victory felt hollow, because this was just the beginning. Theron stood in the aftermath staring at the cost of change, and understood viscerally that reform wasn't clean, wasn't simple, wasn't a matter of signing laws and declaring progress. Reform required blood, required sacrifice, required willingness to lose everything defending principles others would kill to suppress. Celine found him standing among the dead. She looked exhausted, hollow, like someone who spent hours witnessing preventable tragedy. "This is what it takes," she said quietly. "This is the cost of choosing evolution over stagnation. The old powers will keep fighting back because they can't imagine worlds where they're not in control." Theron's voice was raw. "Maybe I was wrong. Maybe reform creates more violence than maintaining the old system. Maybe my father was wrong about everything." Celine grabbed his face, forced him to look at her. "Your father wasn't wrong. He just didn't live long enough to see change through. That's what you're doing now. You're finishing what he started. And yes, it's brutal. Yes, people die. But the alternative is generations of survivors staying silent while predators feast on their suffering." Her silver eyes blazed. "So you can give up. Return to control. Crush resistance like you did for 16 years. Or you can keep fighting for a world where power serves justice. Your choice." Theron's hands covered hers, and he chose. Not safety, not control, evolution, no matter the cost. The war lasted 3 more months. Lord Cassian's coalition grew. 5 more noble houses joined. 2 merchant guilds funded the resistance. Mercenaries flooded in from across the territories. They called it the Restoration War, claiming they fought to restore traditional order. Theron called it what it actually was: the death throes of predators refusing extinction. The battles were brutal. Cities burned. Civilians died. The empire fractured along ideological lines. But slowly, violently, the tide turned. Because the Silver Legion learned to fight with the same ruthless efficiency Theron taught his armies. They used tactics born from survival, strategies the powerful never anticipated because they dismissed Omegas as incapable of sophisticated warfare, and they were wrong, catastrophically wrong. The final battle occurred at Grey Tower Keep, Cassian's stronghold, his last defensive position. 800 mercenaries behind stone walls built to withstand siege for months. Theron led the assault personally, not from the rear, not as commander watching from safe distance. He fought at the front, shield and sword, covered in blood and ash and the visceral reality of violence. Selene fought beside him, not hidden, not protected, carrying blade and fury and the accumulated rage of everyone the Empire broke. They breached the walls after 16 hours of fighting, found Cassian in his war room surrounded by maps and desperate contingency plans. He looked older, thinner, haunted by the realization he was losing. Theron kicked open the door, stood in the entrance covered in blood that wasn't his. Cassian reached for his sword. Selene was faster. She crossed the room, disarmed him, put blade to his throat with the practiced efficiency of someone who survived 7 men trying to own her. "You called me property," she said quietly. "Offered to purchase me like livestock. Now you're kneeling before the girl you dismissed." Cassian's eyes were wide with fear. "Please?" She pressed the blade deeper, begging, like every Omega begged you for mercy over decades of trafficking, like the countless people you sold and tortured and destroyed for profit. Her hand trembled, not from weakness, from the weight of justice. "Selene," Theron said softly. She looked back at him, silver eyes flooded with pain and rage, and the terrible question of whether revenge equaled justice. "If I kill him, am I any different than the monsters I survived?" Theron moved closer. "That's for you to decide. Not me. Not anyone else. Your choice. Your consequences." Selene held Cassian's life in her hands, and chose. She lowered the blade. "You don't deserve mercy," she told Cassian, "but I'm not giving you mercy. I'm giving you something worse. You'll live. You'll watch the empire you fought to preserve disappear completely. You'll survive long enough to understand that everything you believed was wrong." She stepped back. "Theron, he's yours." Theron arrested Cassian, stripped him of titles, exiled him to the northern wastes where he'd spend the rest of his life remembering the girl he underestimated destroyed his entire world. The war ended, not with extermination, with exhaustion. The old powers collapsed, noble houses submitted, merchants accepted the new laws. Anyone still resisting was too weak to matter. The empire had transformed, violently, brutally, irrevocably, and Theron stood at the center of that transformation feeling like a stranger in his own skin, because the king who built empires on fear no longer existed. Something different occupied that space now, something still learning, still growing, still questioning whether power served justice or fed on it. Selene found him in the throne room 6 weeks after Cassian's defeat. Theron sat on the throne staring at empty space, not commanding, not ruling, just existing. She climbed the steps, sat beside him. "You look lost." "I am," Theron admitted. "I spent 16 years knowing exactly who I was, what I stood for, how to maintain control. Now everything's shifted. I don't recognize the Empire. I don't recognize myself." Selene took his hand. "That's growth. That's evolution. You can't become different without leaving the old version behind. It's uncomfortable. It's terrifying. But it's the only way forward." Theron looked at her. "What if I can't maintain this? What if the old patterns return? What if I revert to control because it feels safer?" "Then I'll call you on it," Selene said simply. "That's what love means now. Not blind acceptance, not unconditional support regardless of behavior. Love means demanding growth, challenging regression, refusing to enable patterns that harm." Her grip tightened. "And if you can't accept that, I walk away. Like I promised." Theron pulled her close. Don't walk away." "I won't if you keep growing. But the moment you choose control over conscience, the moment power becomes more important than people, I'm gone. And you can't stop me." Theron understood. That relationship wasn't cage or possession. It was choice, renewed every day, based on behavior, not promises. "I'll keep growing," he said. "I'll keep questioning. I'll keep choosing conscience even when control feels easier." "Prove it," Selene said. "Every day. With every decision. Prove the Empire serves people instead of consuming them." Theron kissed her. Not claiming, not possessing, just loving someone brave enough to demand his best self instead of accepting his worst. Buck. 6 months later, on the anniversary of Celine's arrival, they held a ceremony. Not coronation, not wedding. Recognition. The throne room was packed. Silver Legion soldiers, council members, citizens from across the territories, everyone who witnessed the Empire transform. Theron stood before them. No crown, no armor. Just simple black clothes. Celine stood beside him wearing gray, the same color from her first day. Symbolic, because she never wanted people to forget where she came from. Theron spoke. 1 year ago, a girl walked into this throne room in chains accused of murder. I was prepared to judge her like I judged everyone, through the lens of control and power and maintaining systems I inherited. He looked at Celine. Instead, she judged me, questioned every brutal truth I built my empire on, forced me to confront the cost of survival that forgot its purpose. His voice carried. This empire changed because one person refused to accept that the world couldn't evolve, because survivors became soldiers, because traumatized people chose growth over vengeance, because someone taught a king that real strength is surrendering power to people who understand justice. He turned to the crowd. The old empire died this year. What we build next will be determined by all of us. Not just me, not just the throne, everyone. Because power concentrated becomes tyranny, power distributed becomes community. Theron stepped back and offered the throne to Commander Kaya. The room erupted, but Kaya understood. She didn't take the throne. She stood beside it, beside Theron, beside Celine, beside everyone who chose evolution over comfort. This is the new order, Kaya said. Not one ruler, not one voice. Shared authority, shared responsibility, shared consequences. She looked at the Silver Legion. We survived hell. We built armies. We changed empires. Now we govern together, all of us. No more kings who control everything. No more systems where power flows one direction. Her voice strengthened. We are the Silver Legion, and we claim our place not through conquest, but through the courage to demand better and the strength to build it. The throne room erupted in cheers, not for a king, for a revolution that succeeded. Theron stood beside Celine, watching the empire celebrate its own transformation. What happens now? He asked quietly. Now, Celine said, we find out if people can govern themselves, if community survives without tyranny, if the systems we built actually serve justice. And if they don't? Celine's silver eyes found his. Then we try again, and again, until we build something worth the cost. She took his hand. Together. Theron squeezed back and felt something settle in his chest. Not certainty, not control, peace. The kind that comes from choosing growth over safety, from trusting process over outcomes, from loving someone brave enough to walk away if he stopped deserving her presence. The empire transformed. The king evolved. And the girl who walked in chains became the woman who taught power its only sustainable form. Not domination, partnership, not control. Trust. The throne room doors burst open. A messenger staggered through, face white, breathing ragged. Your Majesty, the Western Territories, there's been an uprising. Theron stepped forward. What kind of uprising? The messenger's voice shook. The children, the ones orphaned by the war. They've organized, armed themselves, and they're not asking for protection. Celine's expression shifted. What are they asking for? The messenger looked at her directly. Justice for the parents your reforms killed. Silence. Absolute devastating silence, because they both understood immediately. Change creates casualties, even righteous change, and those casualties have children. Children who learned the same lesson Theron learned at 16. Violence prevents future violence, control ensures survival, and the cycle begins again unless someone breaks it. Theron looked at Celine. Celine looked back, and they both knew. The revolution wasn't finished, it was just beginning. The Western Territories burned, not metaphorically, literally burned. Smoke columns rose from 6 villages across a 100-mile stretch. The fires weren't random, they were strategic, coordinated, designed to draw attention and resources away from the capital. Theron stood in the war room staring at maps covered in red markers indicating attack sites. Each marker represented homes destroyed, families displaced. The cost of revolution measured in ash and blood. Commander Kaya stood across the table. Her face was drawn, exhausted. She'd spent 3 days coordinating responses to the uprising with minimal sleep. "They're calling themselves the Lost Generation," she said. "Children orphaned when we dismantled the noble houses, when we executed traffickers, when we restructured the economy and entire families lost their livelihoods." "How many?" Theron asked. Kaya's jaw tightened. "Initial reports suggest 3,000, maybe more. They're organized into cells. Decentralized leadership. No single commander to target. They learned from watching us. The irony cut deep. The tactics that helped the Silver Legion succeed were now being used against them." Celine entered carrying updated intelligence reports. She looked older than 6 months ago. The weight of governance carved lines around her eyes. Her silver hair was pulled back tight, practical. She'd stopped wearing gray weeks ago, started dressing in dark leather that allowed movement. Combat readiness. Because peace turned out to be a performance that required constant armed vigilance. "They hit another supply convoy," she said without preamble. 15 dead. Medical supplies stolen. They left a message carved into the wagon. "What message?" Celine's expression was grim. "You killed our parents for justice. We'll kill your future for revenge." The words hung in the air like smoke. Theron's hands pressed flat against the map table. His breathing was controlled, but his knuckles were white. This is what happens when you try to change the world too fast. When you dismantle systems without preparing for the casualties. When you choose righteousness over pragmatism and forget that every action creates reaction. His voice was rough with self-recrimination. "I did this. We did this. We broke the old world and didn't build the new one fast enough." Celine moved beside him. "We made choices. Hard choices. Necessary choices. Some of those choices hurt people who didn't deserve it. Children of nobles who never participated in trafficking but lost everything anyway. Families of merchants whose businesses collapsed during reform. They're casualties of progress." Her voice hardened. "But the alternative was letting the old system continue. More generations of Omegas sold and broken. More centuries of cruelty disguised as tradition. We chose the lesser evil. That doesn't make it painless." Kaya slammed her palm on the table. "Lesser evil still creates enemies. Those children have legitimate grievances. Their parents might have been complicit in trafficking, but the children were innocent. We punished entire bloodlines for the crimes of their elders. That's collective punishment. That's exactly what we fought against." The accusation landed like a physical blow. Because Kaya was right, and Theron knew it. Revolution always devours more than intended, always creates casualties beyond the guilty. The question was whether those casualties justified the change or proved the change was wrong. Theron had no answer, so he did what traumatized rulers always do when facing impossible choices. He prepared for war. "Send word to all garrison commanders," he said. "Full mobilization. I want every village in the Western Territories secured, every child identified, every cell infiltrated." Kaya's eyes widened. "Your Majesty, that's occupation. We'll be treating orphan children like enemy combatants." "They are enemy combatants," Theron said coldly. "They're organized, armed, killing our people. I won't let sentiment blind me to threat assessment." The old patterns were returning. Control as survival, fear as strategy. Dominance as the only response to chaos. Celine saw it immediately. "Theron," she said quietly, "listen to yourself." "I am listening. I'm listening to reports of convoys destroyed and messages carved in blood. I'm listening to the sound of everything we built crumbling because we were naive enough to believe reform would be clean." His voice rose. "I should have crushed resistance completely. Should have executed every noble house member, regardless of age. Should have chosen absolute control over partial mercy. My father's weakness cost him his life. I swore I'd never make that mistake. Then you walked into my throne room and convinced me softness was strength. That restraint was courage. That trust was power." He looked at her with eyes full of betrayal. "You were wrong. Trust gets you killed. Restraint gets your people murdered. And mercy creates enemies who carve threats into supply wagons." The words cut Celine deeper than any blade. Because she heard what Theron was actually saying. He was reverting. Trauma was reclaiming territory that growth temporarily occupied. And if she didn't stop it now, the man who learned to choose conscience over control would disappear completely. Celine's voice was steel. If you occupy the Western territories and treat orphaned children like military targets, you prove everything the lost generation believes, that the new empire is just the old empire wearing different masks, that power still consumes anyone who touches it, that we're hypocrites who preach justice while practicing tyranny. So what would you have me do? Theron demanded. Let them burn villages? Let them kill civilians? Let them destroy everything we built because acknowledging their pain makes us feel morally superior? I'd have you remember why we started this, Celine said. We didn't overthrow the old system to build something marginally better. We did it to prove power could serve people instead of consuming them. The moment you choose occupation over dialogue, you prove we failed. There's no dialogue with people who carve death threats into wagons. There's always dialogue, Celine said, if you're brave enough to face the people you hurt and own the cost of your choices. Theron stared at her and felt something fundamental crack, because she was asking him to do the impossible, to face casualties of his own righteousness. To admit that even justified violence creates unjustified suffering. To accept that being right doesn't absolve you from the consequences of your actions. The weight of that truth was crushing. Lord Marius entered the war room. His face was grave. He carried a sealed letter. Your Majesty, this arrived under courier flag from the lost generation. They're requesting formal parley. Theron took the letter, broke the seal, read in silence. His expression darkened with each line. Finally, he looked up. They want me, personally, unarmed, at the ruins of Greystone Manor, noon tomorrow. They promise safe passage in exchange for conversation. It's a trap, Kaya said immediately. Probably, Theron agreed. Then you can't go. Theron looked at Celine. What do you think? Celine's silver eyes held his. I think you're terrified they'll say things you can't refute, that they'll force you to confront casualties you'd rather ignore, that facing them means admitting the revolution wasn't clean and righteous and simple. Her voice softened. But I also think you're brave enough to go anyway. Theron's jaw worked, and the old patterns whispered. It's a trap. They'll kill you, send soldiers, maintain control, survive. But a different voice underneath, quieter, newer, more dangerous. Maybe some debts require facing the blade. I'll go, Theron said. Kaya protested. Marius argued. The War Council erupted in objections. Theron silenced them all with one raised hand. I'll go. Alone. Unarmed. Because if we can't face the casualties of our choices, then we're not governing. We're just maintaining a different kind of tyranny. He looked at Celine. If I don't return, the empire is yours. You and Kaya. Don't let it revert. Don't let fear win. Celine's hands clenched. You're coming back. Maybe. Theron, I love you, he said, but love doesn't guarantee survival. It just makes the risk worth taking. He left before she could respond. Greystone Manor sat in ruins 30 miles west of Varkane. It was once the estate of House Dravik, Lord Cassian's ancestral home. 300 years of bloodline history reduced to blackened stone and collapsed walls during the Restoration War. Theron arrived at noon on horseback, alone, unarmed, wearing simple clothes without house sigils or royal insignia, just a man riding toward judgment. The ruins were surrounded by figures, hundreds of them, children ranging from maybe 12 to early 20s, all of them armed, all of them watching with the hollow eyes of people who survived trauma and chose rage over grief. They parted as Theron approached, creating a corridor straight to the center of the ruins where a girl waited. She was maybe 17, tall, thin. Her face carried the sharp features of northern bloodlines. Her hair was dark blonde. Her eyes were the pale gray of winter storms. She wore the tattered remains of a noble house dress, expensive silk now torn and stained. A sword hung at her hip, too large for her frame but carried with familiarity. Theron recognized her immediately, Cassian's daughter. He'd seen her once, years ago, at some state function. She'd been maybe 13 then, smiling, privileged, utterly convinced the world would always bend to accommodate her. Now she looked like violence given human form. Theron dismounted, walked forward until he stood 10 feet from her. My name is King Theron Valacrest, he said. You requested this meeting. The girl's expression was cold. I know who you are, the Wolf King, the man who destroyed my family, who executed my father's allies, who burned our home and called it justice. Her voice carried across the ruins. My name is Liana Dravik, and I speak for 3,000 children you made orphans. Theron didn't flinch. Your father funded trafficking networks. He profited from the sale and torture of thousands of Omegas. The evidence was irrefutable. His execution was justice. Justice, Liana repeated. Her laugh was bitter. You killed him for crimes the entire empire committed. Every noble house participated in that economy. Every merchant guild profited. You singled out specific families and destroyed them completely while letting others survive. That's not justice. That's selective punishment disguised as righteousness. She stepped closer. And you didn't just kill the guilty. You stripped entire bloodlines of property, of status, of any means to survive. My younger brother was 9 years old when your soldiers threw us into the streets. He died of winter fever 3 months later because we had no shelter, no resources, no family left to help us. Her voice broke. He was 9. What crimes did he commit? What trafficking did he fund? He was a child who loved riding horses and reading adventure stories. And you killed him as surely as if you'd put a blade through his heart. The words landed like hammer blows. Theron had prepared for accusations of tyranny, of corruption, of hypocrisy. He wasn't prepared for the undeniable truth that revolution creates casualties among the innocent. I'm sorry, he said quietly. Liana's eyes blazed. Sorry? You're sorry. Your reforms killed my brother and hundreds like him. Children who starved because their families lost everything overnight. Who died from exposure because you stripped noble houses without planning for the displaced. Who watched their parents executed and learned that the new empire was just as brutal as the old one. She moved closer, close enough that Theron could see tears streaming down her face. You want to know why we're burning villages? Because you burned ours first. You want to know why we're killing your people? Because you killed ours. You started a war and called it reform. Now you're shocked that the casualties are fighting back. Theron's throat tightened. Your father was guilty. My father was a monster, Liana said flatly. I know exactly what he did. I found the ledgers, the records of purchases, the names of Omegas he sold. I'm not defending him. I'm asking why my 9-year-old brother had to die for my father's crimes. She was shaking now, rage and grief warring in her expression. You could have executed the guilty and protected their families. You could have confiscated property and provided resources for displaced children. You could have chosen surgical justice instead of collective punishment, but you didn't. You chose spectacle. You chose to make examples. You chose to show the old powers that the new empire was strong enough to crush entire bloodlines. Her voice dropped to something cold and final. So don't stand there and pretend you're different than every other king who sacrificed innocent people for political necessity. You're exactly the same. You just tell yourself better stories. Theron had no defense, because every word was true. He did choose spectacle, did strip families without preparing for casualties, did prioritize sending messages over protecting the innocent, and children died because of it. What do you want? He asked quietly. Liana's expression hardened. I want you to admit you were wrong. Publicly. I want you to acknowledge that reform wasn't clean or righteous or simple, that innocent people suffered, that children died, that the new empire created casualties among the powerless it claimed to protect. And if I do that, then we negotiate. You provide resources for every family displaced by reform. You establish programs supporting orphaned children regardless of their parents' crimes. You admit that justice requires accountability even when the powerful are the ones causing harm. She stepped back. But if you refuse, if you hide behind righteousness and pretend reform justified every casualty, then this war continues and will burn your empire the same way you burned ours. Theron understood immediately. This wasn't about territory or power or traditional warfare. This was about recognition, about forcing the powerful to acknowledge the cost of their righteousness, about refusing to let casualties be dismissed as necessary sacrifice. He looked at Liana, at the hundreds of children surrounding them, at faces marked by trauma and loss and the desperate need to matter. You're right, he said. The words fell like stones into water. Liana's expression flickered. surprise breaking through rage. What? You're right. About all of it. I chose spectacle over surgical justice. I stripped families without preparing for consequences. I prioritized sending political messages over protecting innocent children. And people died because of it. Children died. Your brother died. Theron's voice carried across the ruins. I told myself it was necessary, that reform required hard choices, that you can't make an empire without breaking bones. But the truth is simpler. I was so focused on destroying the old system, I didn't think carefully enough about who would suffer in the collapse. He met Liana's eyes directly. That was wrong. I was wrong. And I'm sorry. Not because saying it absolves me, but because you deserve to hear someone with power admit they hurt you unjustly. Silence. The kind that feels like the world holding its breath. Liana stared at him, her expression cycling through disbelief to anger to something more dangerous. Hope. You mean that? She asked quietly. Yes, then prove it. Return to Varkan. Call a public assembly. Admit everything you just said in front of the Empire. Establish programs supporting displaced families. Give us resources to rebuild instead of forcing us into violence as the only path to survival. Theron nodded. I will. Today. You have my word. Liana's jaw worked. Your word means nothing. You're a king. Kings lie. Then send representatives to watch, to verify, to hold me accountable if I fail. He stepped closer. I can't undo what happened. I can't bring back your brother or the hundreds like him. But I can acknowledge the cost. I can provide resources going forward. I can try to build something where reform doesn't require sacrificing children. Can you forgive me? The question hung in the ruins like smoke. Liana's eyes glistened. No, I can't forgive you. My brother is dead. That's not fixable with words or resources or programs. He's gone because you chose speed over caution, spectacle over compassion. Her voice cracked. But I can accept that you're trying, that you're willing to admit failure, that you're not hiding behind righteousness like every other powerful man who caused harm and called it necessary. She looked at the children surrounding them. We'll watch. We'll verify. And if you follow through, we'll stop fighting. But understand this, King Theron. You're not forgiven. You're on trial. Forever. Every decision you make will be measured against the children you killed through carelessness. That's fair, Theron said. Liana extended her hand. Then we have terms. Theron took her hand, gripped it firmly, and felt the weight of accountability settle across his shoulders like iron. He returned to Varkane and did exactly what he promised. Called a public assembly in the central plaza. Stood before thousands of citizens without crown or armor or any symbol of authority, just a man admitting failure. He spoke for 20 minutes, detailed every choice that prioritized message over mercy, every family displaced without preparation, every child who suffered because reform moved too fast without safety nets. He named Liana's brother specifically, Marcus Dravik. 9 years old, loved horses and adventure stories, died of winter fever because the new empire stripped his family's resources without providing alternatives. The plaza was silent, not the hostile silence of people preparing attack, the stunned silence of people witnessing something unprecedented. A king admitting he was wrong, publicly, completely, without deflection or justification. When Theron finished, he established immediate programs, resources for displaced families, education funds for orphan children, regardless of parentage, housing assistance, medical care, everything that should have been implemented before stripping noble houses. The crowd didn't cheer. They watched with cautious recognition. This was accountability. Messy, uncomfortable, necessary. Celine found him afterward in the empty throne room. She didn't speak immediately, just stood beside him while he processed what just happened. Finally, Theron broke the silence. I keep thinking about your brother, about Marcus Dravik, about every child who died because I moved too fast. His voice was raw. I thought I was different, that I learned from my father's mistakes, that I could wield power without becoming the monster. But I'm just another king who sacrificed innocent people and called it progress. Celine took his hand. The difference is, you admitted it. You face the casualties instead of hiding behind necessity. That doesn't fix what happened, but it's more than most rulers ever do. Is it enough? No, it's never enough. The dead stay dead. The trauma remains, but it's a foundation for building something better. She squeezed his hand. You're evolving, painfully, publicly, without the comfort of believing you're always right. That's growth. It's just not the clean, inspirational version people imagine. Theron pulled her close. I don't know if I can do this. Govern while accepting I'll keep making mistakes that hurt people. It feels impossible. It is impossible, Celine said. That's why most rulers choose certainty over accountability. Why they hide behind righteousness and never question whether they're wrong. You're choosing the harder path, the path that requires constant evaluation and admission of failure. Her silver eyes found his. But it's the only path that leads anywhere worth going. They stood together in the throne room, two people trying to build something neither believed possible, while Empire watched and waited to see if accountability could survive proximity to power. 3 weeks later, everything collapsed. Not from external enemies, from the person Theron trusted most. Commander Kaya Voss called an emergency council session. Her face was grim. She carried documents sealed with silver wax. Your Majesty, we need to talk about the Silver Legion. Theron looked up from reports he was reviewing. What about them? Kaya placed the documents on the table, unsealed them with deliberate care. They're planning to leave. Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. What do you mean leave? Celine asked carefully. Kaya's expression was stone. The Legion has been holding private meetings for weeks, discussing whether this empire is salvageable, whether reform is genuine or just performance, whether King Theron can actually govern without reverting to control. She slid the documents forward. These are minutes from their councils, proposals for establishing independent Omega territories outside Varkane's authority, discussions about whether the Silver Legion should remain or withdraw and build something separate. Theron's hands went still. You're saying they want to secede. I'm saying they're questioning whether integration is possible, whether alphas and omegas can truly govern together or if the power dynamics are too ingrained, whether trusting you was a mistake. The betrayal cut deeper than any blade, because Theron gave everything to earn that trust, changed his entire empire, admitted failures publicly, faced casualties, and owned consequences. And it still wasn't enough. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked quietly. Because I was part of the discussions, Kaya said. The admission landed like a physical blow. Celine stood abruptly. You were planning to leave? Kaya's expression didn't change. I was considering whether staying serves the Legion or just makes us complicit in a system that might not be fixable. She looked at Theron directly. You're trying. I believe that. You admitted failures and established programs and faced casualties. But the question isn't whether you're trying, it's whether trying is enough. Whether one generation of reform can undo centuries of systemic violence. Whether power can actually change or just becomes more sophisticated at hiding its brutality. Her voice hardened. The Legion has given a year to this experiment. We've fought, bled, watched our people die defending reforms that made us targets. And we're exhausted, tired of being the moral compass for a king who needs constant reminding not to revert, tired of justifying integration to survivors who think we're naive. She slid another document forward. This is a proposal. The Legion withdraws to the southern territories, establishes independent governance, maintains diplomatic relations with Varkane, but operates autonomously. We build our own system instead of trying to fix yours. Theron stared at the document. His entire worldview was fracturing, because he believed accountability and growth in facing failures would be enough, that admitting wrong and establishing reforms would prove the empire could change. But Kaya was saying something more fundamental. Maybe the empire itself was the problem. Maybe power concentrated always corrupted, regardless of the person holding it. Maybe the only solution was distribution so complete it looked like separation. If you leave, Theron said quietly, the empire fragments. Other territories will follow. Everything we built collapses. Maybe that's necessary, Kaya said. Maybe empires are the problem. Maybe the answer isn't better kings, but no kings at all. Decentralized governance. Communities determining their own futures without central authority dictating terms. Her eyes were hard. You're a good man, Theron. Better than most. But you're still a king. And kings always revert when threatened. Always choose control when chaos feels imminent. Always sacrifice others to maintain power. I haven't... You were about to occupy the Western Territories, Kaya said flatly. 3 weeks ago. You were ready to treat orphaned children as military targets because they threatened your authority. Celine stopped you, but the impulse was there. The old patterns waiting underneath growth like bedrock beneath topsoil. She straightened. So yes, the Legion is considering withdrawal. Because we're not convinced growth is permanent. We think it's temporary restraint that will collapse the moment real crisis hits. Prove us wrong. The challenge hung in the air. Celine looked between them. Her face was pale, stricken, because she was caught between two truths. Theron was trying, genuinely, painfully. But Kaya was right that trying wasn't permanent, that trauma waited underneath growth, that crisis revealed core patterns, and Celine didn't know which truth mattered more. What do you want me to say? Theron asked. His voice was hollow. That I'll never revert? That growth is permanent? I can't promise that. I can only promise I'll keep trying, keep questioning, keep choosing accountability when control feels safer. Is that enough for you? He looked at Kaya directly. The commander's expression softened slightly. I don't know. That's the problem. I don't know if trying is enough or if we're just delaying inevitable betrayal. Then give me time, Theron said. Give me a chance to prove the Empire can evolve. That decentralization doesn't require separation, that we can build shared governance without fragmenting into territories. How much time? Theron's jaw worked. 6 months. If the Empire reverts, if I revert, if reforms collapse under pressure, then I'll support your independence personally, help establish Southern territories as autonomous, provide resources for transition. He stood. But if we succeed, if shared governance works, if the Empire proves capable of evolution, then you stay. And we build something unprecedented together. Kaya stared at him, calculating odds, measuring risk, deciding whether trust was justified or just another trap. Finally, she nodded. 6 months. But understand this, Your Majesty, we're watching everything, every decision, every crisis, every moment when control feels easier than conscience. One reversion, one slide back into old patterns. And we're gone. Theron extended his hand. Agreed. Kaya took it. And the Empire gained 6 months to prove reform could survive proximity to power. Monsieur, the test came faster than anyone expected. 4 days later, a plague outbreak struck the Eastern Territories. Not natural, biological warfare. Someone released infected corpses into water supplies. The same tactic Theron used during the siege of Greystone. His own brutal strategy turned against him. The disease spread fast, hemorrhagic fever, 40% mortality. No known cure. 3,000 infected within a week. The source was traced to remnants of the old noble houses, families who lost everything during reform and chose terrorism as final revenge. They left a message with the bodies. You taught us this strategy, King Theron. Now burn in your own tactics. The Empire panicked. Citizens demanded quarantine, complete isolation of infected territories. Burning villages to prevent spread? The exact brutality Theron spent a year trying to evolve beyond. The High Council convened an emergency session. Lord Marius spoke first. Your Majesty, the solution is clear. Quarantine the Eastern Territories. Full military blockade. No one enters or leaves. We contain the outbreak and accept casualties as necessary sacrifice. That's condemning 3,000 people to death, Celine said. 3,000 to save 300,000, Marius replied. Basic mathematics. Lady Severin spoke carefully. There might be medical solutions. The old texts mention treatments for hemorrhagic fevers. If we organize research... We don't have time for research, another council member interrupted. The disease spreads by the hour. Every delay costs lives. Quarantine is the only realistic option. Theron sat silent through the debate. His mind was calculating, assessing, running through scenarios. And underneath the strategic thinking, old patterns whispered. Quarantine is control. Isolation is safety. Sacrifice the few to protect the many. You know this works. You use this strategy for 16 years, but a different voice, quieter, more dangerous. Quarantine is giving up, is choosing fear over problem solving, is proving you revert under pressure exactly like Kaya predicted. Commander Kaya stood at the far end of the table, watching him, measuring this exact moment. This was the test, crisis revealing core patterns, and 6 months of the Legion's future depending on which voice Theron listened to. He looked at Celine. Her silver eyes held both fear and faith. She didn't speak, didn't offer advice, didn't try to influence his choice, because this decision had to be his alone. Theron stood. No quarantine. The council erupted. Your Majesty, we send medical teams, researchers, every resource we have. We work the problem instead of containing it. We prove that crisis doesn't require sacrificing people to maintain control. That's suicide, Marius said. If the disease spreads beyond the Eastern Territories, the entire empire could fall. Then we fall trying to save people instead of succeeding by sacrificing them, Theron said. Because if the only way this empire survives is through brutal calculation that treats human lives as mathematics, then it's not worth saving. He looked at Kaya. You asked if I'd revert under pressure. Here's your answer. I'm choosing the harder path. The path that might fail. The path that risks everything on the chance that humanity matters more than control. His voice carried across the chamber. Mobilize every medic, every healer, every person with knowledge of infectious disease. We're going into those territories. We're treating the sick, and we're finding a cure because that's what evolution looks like. Not perfect, not safe, but choosing conscience when control would be easier. The council stared. Kaya's expression was unreadable. Then she spoke. The Silver Legion volunteers, every medic we have, every soldier willing to risk infection, we'll join your teams. The statement was loaded. Not just offering help, offering partnership, offering trust. Theron felt something crack in his chest. Not breaking, healing. Thank you, he said quietly. Don't thank me yet, Kaya replied. We might all die. This might be the decision that ends the empire. She moved toward the door. But at least we'll die proving we tried. They went into the Eastern Territories that night. 300 medics, 50 researchers, 500 soldiers providing security. Theron rode at the front, Celine beside him, Kaya commanding the Legion units. The infected zones looked like visions of hell. Bodies lined the streets. The living stumbled between buildings with bleeding eyes and skin covered in hemorrhagic lesions. Children cried for parents already dead. The air smelled like decay and desperation. Theron's team worked 18-hour shifts, treating symptoms, organizing quarantine within the zones to slow spread, burning bodies to prevent further infection, collecting samples for research. It was brutal, exhausting, hopeless. And Theron worked beside his people, not commanding from safety, not directing from protected distance. He carried bodies, changed dressings, held dying children while they wept for families already gone. Because leadership through crisis wasn't about strategy. It was about standing in hell with the people you asked to walk through fire. On the 7th day, Celine collapsed. Fever, chills, the first signs of infection. Theron found her in a medical tent trying to hide symptoms while continuing treatment. He carried her to isolation before she could protest. You're infected, she said weakly. You carried me. You're exposed. I know. Her silver eyes were frightened now. We might die. Probably, Theron agreed. He sat beside her, took her hand. For what it's worth, I don't regret this. Choosing to come here. Choosing to try saving people instead of sacrificing them. Even if it kills us, I don't regret it. Celine's fingers tightened around his. You really did change, she whispered. No, Theron said quietly. You changed me. You and Kaya and Liana and everyone who forced me to see that power without humanity destroys itself. He leaned close. I love you. Not because you're mine, not because I own you, but because you taught a traumatized predator how to be human again. Tears streaked Celine's face. I love you too. And I'm glad we tried. Even if it ends like this, I'm glad we tried. They sat together while fever consumed them, holding hands while mortality approached. Two people who changed an empire, possibly dying to prove that change mattered. The cure came on the 9th day, not from Varkane researchers, from a Legion medic who remembered old Omega healing traditions, plant compounds that counteracted hemorrhagic symptoms. It wasn't perfect. 30% of infected still died, but 70% survived, including Theron and Celine. They recovered slowly, painfully, and emerged from the Eastern Territories 3 weeks later to find the Empire transformed again. Because Varkane watched their king walk into plague zones, watched him risk death treating the sick, watched him choose saving people over controlling outcomes, and something shifted in the collective consciousness. Maybe reform wasn't performance, maybe growth was genuine, maybe power could evolve. Commander Kaya met them at the city gates. She looked exhausted, thinner, marked by the same hell they all survived, but her expression was different, not wary, not calculating, something closer to respect. "You passed," she said simply. Theron's voice was hoarse from fever. "Does that mean the Legion stays?" Kaya's smile was small. "Genuine. It means we keep trying. Together. Because you proved something I didn't think possible. That crisis can reveal growth instead of just exposing trauma. That choosing conscience over control is possible even when death is the likely consequence." She extended her hand. "The Silver Legion remains. As full partners. As equals. Building this empire together." Theron took her hand and felt the weight of 6 months of probation lift. They walked through Varkane's streets together. King, commander, survivor. 3 people who almost died proving reform could survive pressure. The city celebrated their return. Not with parades or ceremony, with quiet recognition that something fundamental shifted. The empire wasn't fixed, wasn't perfect, but it was evolving, painfully, genuinely, one crisis at a time. That night, Theron and Celine stood on the palace ramparts overlooking the city, same spot where they stood a year ago, questioning if any of this was possible. "We survived," Celine said quietly. "Barely, but we did. We faced crisis. We chose conscience, and the empire didn't collapse." Theron pulled her close. Kai almost left. The Legion almost withdrew. "We were hours from fragmentation." "But it didn't happen," Celine said. "Because you proved growth is possible. That trauma doesn't have to define you forever. That choosing evolution is possible even when reversion feels inevitable." She looked up at him. "You're not the same king who sat on that throne a year ago. You're not even the same person who walked into those plague zones. You're becoming something unprecedented." "What's that?" "A ruler who admits failure, who owns consequences, who chooses accountability when control would be easier." Her voice softened. "You're becoming what your father believed possible, power that serves people instead of consuming them." Theron's throat tightened. "I wish he could see this." "Maybe he can," Celine said. "Maybe the empire we're building is exactly what he died believing could exist." They stood together watching the city sleep, and for the first time since his father's death 16 years ago, Theron felt something other than grief about that memory. Hope. Not certainty, not confidence, just the fragile possibility that maybe, possibly, the world could be different. That power could evolve. That empires could serve justice. That traumatized predators could learn to be human again. The rampart door burst open. A guard staggered through, face white, breathing ragged. "Your Majesty, urgent message from the southern borders." Theron turned. "What is it?" The guard's voice shook. "Commander Kaya. She's been arrested by Southern Territorial magistrates. They're charging her with war crimes from her years leading the Silver Legion. They're demanding extradition for trial." The message continued. "If you refuse, the Southern Territories threaten secession. If you comply, the Silver Legion threatens revolt." Silence. Absolute devastating silence. Celine's hand found Theron's, and they both understood immediately. The real test wasn't surviving plague. It was choosing between betraying a trusted ally to maintain political stability, or protecting that ally and watching the empire fracture, control through sacrifice, or conscience through chaos. The choice that would define whether reform was genuine or just performance that collapsed under real pressure. Theron looked at Celine. Her silver eyes reflected the same terror he felt, because there was no right answer. Only impossible choices that would prove what he actually valued when everything was at stake. The war room felt like a tomb. Theron stood at the center, surrounded by maps that no longer mattered. Strategic positions, trade routes, military installations, all of it rendered meaningless by a single impossible choice. Betray Kaya or watch the Empire fragment, save a trusted ally or maintain the fragile coalition that kept millions from starvation and chaos. Conscience or control wearing new masks. Lord Marius stood near the eastern wall. His face was grave. He'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Your Majesty, the Southern magistrates are within their legal rights. Commander Voss led military operations during the rebellion, operations that resulted in civilian casualties. Under territorial law, she can be tried for those actions regardless of political context. She was fighting to free enslaved people, Celine said. Her voice was ice. Every casualty occurred during legitimate military engagement against forces actively participating in trafficking. The law doesn't distinguish motive, Marius replied. Only actions. Commander Voss ordered attacks on noble estates, burned properties. Her forces killed non-combatants during raids. Those are war crimes under Southern territorial statutes. He looked at Theron directly. If you refuse extradition, the Southern territories will declare independence. 5 major cities, agricultural regions that feed half the empire, trade ports that connect us to eastern markets. We'll lose everything we gained during reform. And if I comply, Theron said quietly, the Silver Legion revolts. 15,000 soldiers who fought beside us, who trusted that this empire was different, who believed reform meant protection instead of political calculation. His hands pressed against the map table. Either choice destroys what we built. Lady Severin spoke carefully. She'd remained silent through most of the debate. Watching, calculating. There might be a third option, Your Majesty. Everyone turned. Severin moved to the table. Her expression was thoughtful, strategic. The Southern magistrates want justice. The Silver Legion wants protection. What if we offer both through different mechanisms? A trial, but held here, under imperial authority, with representatives from both Southern territories and the Legion present, full transparency, international observation. Whatever the verdict, both sides agree to accept it. It's compromise, she continued. Neither side gets exactly what they want, but both sides get something. The South gets their trial. The Legion gets assurance Kaya won't face biased prosecution. You maintain unity by proving the Empire can balance competing justice claims. Theron considered it. The strategy was sound, politically brilliant, the kind of solution that maintained control while appearing to serve conscience, which meant it was exactly the trap he spent a year learning to recognize. Because real justice wasn't about balancing competing claims. It was about determining what actually happened and accepting consequences regardless of political cost. No, Theron said. The room went silent. Your Majesty, Marius began carefully, no compromise, no political theater disguised as justice. If the Southern territories have legitimate grievances, then Kaya deserves a legitimate trial, not a performance designed to satisfy multiple audiences. He straightened. Send word to the Southern magistrates. Commander Voss will stand trial, in their courts, under their jurisdiction, with full legal representation and transparent proceedings. Celine's face went white. Theron, you can't. I can, and I am. Because if we believe in accountability, it applies to everyone, including people we care about, including allies who fought beside us. No one is above justice, not even heroes. His voice hardened. But I'm also sending a message to the Southern territories. If this trial is anything other than legitimate prosecution, if it becomes political persecution, if they use justice as excuse for revenge, then I will burn their cities to the ground and salt the earth where their magistrates stood. He looked at Marius. Make that very clear. We're offering compliance with legal process, not surrender to political manipulation. They want war crimes prosecution? They'll get it. But it will be actual justice, or they'll learn what war crimes actually look like when I'm the one committing them. The threat was not empty. Every person in that room knew Theron was capable of exactly what he described. Lord Marius swallowed hard. As you command, Your Majesty. He left to draft the correspondence. Celine grabbed Theron's arm the moment the door closed. You're sending her to potential execution. Do you understand that? The Southern Territories hate the Silver Legion. They'll use this trial to destroy her regardless of evidence. I know. Then why? Because she's right, Theron said. About everything, about accountability, about power answering for its actions, about refusing to hide behind political necessity when justice demands consequences. He pulled Celine close. Kaya led military operations that killed people. Some of those people were guilty. Some were probably innocent. Some were children caught in crossfire. If we believe casualties deserve recognition, if we believe accountability matters, then we can't shield Kaya just because she fought for righteous cause. His voice dropped. That's the hardest lesson, the one I've been avoiding. Righteous violence still creates casualties. Liberation still harms innocents, and good people still answer for harm they caused even when their cause was just. Celine's eyes glistened. What if they execute her? Then we lose someone extraordinary, someone who changed the empire, someone I consider a friend. Theron's jaw tightened. But we prove that justice isn't selective, that accountability applies to everyone, that this empire stands for something beyond protecting people we like. The words tasted like ash, because Theron didn't want to sacrifice Kaya, didn't want to lose an ally who proved reform could work, didn't want to face the possibility that doing the right thing meant devastating consequences. But he understood finally. Leadership wasn't choosing between right and wrong. It was choosing between right and accepting that sometimes conscience costs everything. Commander Kaya Voss received the news in her quarters. She stood at her window overlooking the training yards, watching Legion soldiers drilling, preparing for threats that kept evolving. Theron entered without guards, without ceremony, just two people who survived hell together facing another impossible moment. Kaya turned when she heard the door. She already knew. The king's face told her everything. You're sending me south, she said. Not a question. Statement of fact. Yes. Kaya's expression didn't change. No fear, no anger, just calm acceptance. How long until they come for me? 3 days. Enough time to arrange legal representation, to prepare your defense, to organize witnesses who can testify to military necessity. He moved closer. Kaya, I'm sorry. This is the hardest decision I've ever made. But if we stand for accountability, it has to apply universally, even to people who fought for justice. I know, Kaya said quietly. I've known since the first raid that someday I'd answer for the casualties. You don't lead military operations without creating harm. The question was always whether I'd face consequences or hide behind political protection. Her voice was steady. I'm glad you chose justice over protection. It proves everything we built together actually means something. You might die. I've been dying since I was 14, Kaya said. The day they first sold me. Every year after that was borrowed time. If it ends now, at least it ends standing for something that mattered. She extended her hand. Thank you for being brave enough to do the right thing even when it costs you personally. Theron took her hand, gripped it hard. If the trial is corrupt, if they twist justice into persecution, I will come for you. I will burn the Southern Territories. I will prove that choosing accountability doesn't mean accepting injustice. Kaya's smile was small, genuine. I know you will. That's why I trust this decision. They stood together in silence. Two warriors who changed an empire, possibly saying goodbye. The Silver Legion erupted when they learned what happened. Not immediately. First came stunned disbelief, then anger, then something more dangerous, betrayal. They gathered in the training yards, 15,000 soldiers who fought beside the empire, who believed reform meant protection, who trusted that standing with King Theron meant safety, and he just handed their commander to enemies who wanted her dead. Theron walked into that gathering alone. No guards, no armor, no weapons. Just a man facing the consequences of his choices. The crowd parted as he approached, not respectfully, with barely restrained fury. Soldiers who weeks ago would have died defending him now looked at him with contempt. He reached the center of the formation, climbed onto a supply wagon so everyone could see him, 15,000 hostile eyes locked on. Theron's voice carried across the yard. You're angry. You feel betrayed. You believe I sacrificed Commander Voss to maintain political stability. that I chose empire over loyalty, that I proved powerful men always revert when tested. You're not wrong to feel that way." The admission rippled through the crowd. But here's what actually happened. The Southern Territories have legitimate legal claims. Commander Voss led operations that resulted in civilian casualties. Children died during raids she ordered. Families burned in estates her forces attacked. Those are facts. They happened. They can't be erased because the cause was righteous. His voice hardened. I spent 16 years hiding brutal choices behind political necessity, calling casualties acceptable losses, treating justice as something that applied to enemies but not allies. That's exactly the system we fought to destroy. So yes, I'm sending Kaya to stand trial. Not because I want to, not because it's politically convenient, because accountability means nothing if it only applies to people we don't like. A soldier near the front shouted, "You're condemning her to death!" "Maybe," Theron said. "Maybe the trial is legitimate and evidence proves guilt. Maybe she faces execution for casualties she actually caused. If that happens, it will destroy me. But it will also prove this empire stands for something beyond protecting the powerful." Another voice, younger, angrier. "What about loyalty? What about protecting people who fought beside you?" Theron's expression was grim. Loyalty doesn't mean shielding people from consequences. It means standing beside them when they face justice. It means providing resources for defense. It means ensuring the trial is fair. And it means burning the world down if persecution replaces prosecution. He looked across the gathering. "I'm not abandoning Kaya. I'm trusting that justice can work, that trials can be legitimate, that accountability serves something bigger than protecting allies." His voice dropped to something raw. But make no mistake, if the Southern Territories corrupt this trial, if they use justice as excuse for revenge, if they harm her without legitimate cause, then I will show them what actual war crimes look like. I will reduce their cities to ash. I will prove that choosing accountability doesn't mean accepting injustice. Silence. Heavy. Dangerous. A figure pushed through the crowd. One of Kaya's lieutenants, a woman named Sarah who survived 7 trafficking rings before joining the Legion. Her face was hard, scarred, marked by violence that left permanent damage. "How do we know this isn't just performance?" she demanded. "How do we know you won't let them kill her to avoid fragmenting the Empire?" Theron met her eyes directly. "You don't. You have to choose whether to trust me, whether growth is genuine or just temporary restraint, whether I'll revert when tested or continue choosing conscience. That's the hardest part of accountability. It requires faith, not certainty. Just the willingness to believe people can become different." He climbed down from the wagon. The Silver Legion has 3 choices. Stay and watch how this unfolds. Leave and build something separate. Or take action against me for what you view as betrayal. Whatever you choose, I won't stop you, because forced loyalty is just control wearing a different mask. Theron walked back through the crowd. No one touched him. No one spoke. They just watched him leave, and began the painful process of deciding whether trust was justified or just another fantasy that got good people killed. The Southern magistrates arrived to collect Kaya 3 days later. They came with ceremony. 50 soldiers in formal dress uniforms, magistrates wearing traditional robes, carriages built for transporting high-value prisoners. The spectacle was intentional. They wanted everyone to see this, to witness that the Southern Territories could demand accountability from the Empire's heroes. Kaya walked out to meet them wearing simple gray, the same color Celine wore when she first arrived in chains. Symbolic, because both women understood what it meant to stand powerless before systems designed to break them. Theron was there, Celine beside him, half the High Council watching from the palace steps. The head magistrate was a man named Corvus, 60 years old, weathered face, eyes like flint. He'd lost family during the Silver Legion raids. His investment in this trial was personal. "Commander Kaya Voss," he began formally, "you are charged with 17 counts of civilian casualties during military operations against Southern Territorial holdings. You will be transported to stand trial in the Court of Southern Justice. Do you understand these charges?" Kaya's voice was steady. "I understand. Do you surrender willingly to territorial jurisdiction?" "I do." Corvus nodded, gestured to his soldiers. They moved forward with chains. Theron's entire body went rigid, every instinct screaming to intervene, to stop this, to prove that protecting allies mattered more than abstract justice. Celine's hand found his, squeezed hard, grounding him, reminding him why this mattered. The soldiers placed chains on Kaya's wrists, her ankles, connected them with links designed to restrict movement. She didn't resist, didn't protest, just stood there accepting the weight of accountability. Corvus turned to Theron. King Theron Valacrest, the Southern Territories acknowledge your cooperation. This trial will be conducted with full legal transparency. International observers will be present. Commander Voss will receive adequate legal representation. Good, Theron said. His voice was dangerously quiet, because if this trial becomes persecution, if you use justice as excuse for revenge, if you harm her without legitimate cause, then you and I will have a very different conversation, one conducted with armies instead of words. Corvus's expression hardened. Are you threatening territorial sovereignty? I'm promising consequences, Theron replied. You want war crimes prosecution? Conduct it legitimately. But corrupt this trial, and I'll show you what war crimes actually look like when I'm the one committing them. The magistrate's face paled slightly, because everyone knew Theron was capable of exactly what he described. The carriages departed an hour later. Kaya looked back once as they rolled through the southern gates. Her eyes found Theron's across the distance, and she smiled. Not bitter, not afraid, proud. Because accountability was the price of building something worth defending, even if it cost everything. Possessive. The trial began 2 weeks later in the southern capital of Ashvale. The courtroom was packed. Hundreds of observers, journalists from across the territories, representatives from foreign kingdoms, the entire empire watching to see if justice could survive political pressure. The prosecution presented their case methodically. 17 specific incidents. Raids on noble estates, military operations that resulted in civilian casualties. Children killed during attacks. Families burned alive when forces set buildings on fire without verifying occupancy. They brought witnesses, survivors who lost loved ones, parents who buried children, people whose lives were destroyed by military actions Kaya ordered. The testimony was devastating. A mother whose 8-year-old daughter died when Legion soldiers set fire to an estate without checking for non-combatants. The woman held a portrait of her child while describing flames and screams and the smell of burning flesh. A father who lost his son during a raid that targeted a noble house. The boy was 12. He'd been visiting his uncle. Wrong place, wrong time. Dead anyway. 17 stories, 17 families, 17 graves filled with people who weren't soldiers, weren't participants, just casualties of righteous violence. Kaya sat through all of it. Her face was stone, but Theron knew her well enough to see what the testimony cost, because she remembered every operation, every decision, every moment when she chose military objective over absolute certainty that only combatants would die. Those choices made sense in the moment. Tactical necessity, operational urgency. The brutal calculus of warfare, where perfect information is impossible and hesitation costs missions. But sitting in that courtroom hearing parents describe dead children made tactical necessity sound like moral cowardice. The defense presented their case next. Kaya's attorney was a woman named Alara, sharp, brilliant, ruthless in her dedication to legitimate legal defense. She established context, the trafficking networks that operated through those noble estates, the decades of Omega suffering, the systematic brutality that made military intervention necessary. She brought witnesses who survived the very houses that were raided, Omegas who testified that those estates were sites of torture, that the noble families harbored trafficking operations, that military action was the only way to stop ongoing atrocities. She proved that Kaya took reasonable precautions, warned estates before raids, provided evacuation time, targeted operations during hours when non-combatant presence was minimized. But she couldn't erase the dead children, couldn't bring back the 8-year-old who burned, couldn't undo the 12-year-old in the wrong place. Reasonable precautions still resulted in casualties. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Theron attended every session, sat in the observer section, watched Kaya face consequences for choices they both knew were necessary but not clean. Celine sat beside him, silent, bearing witness to the cost of revolution. On the final day, Kaya took the stand. The prosecution's lead attorney was a man named Darius, young, ambitious, hungry to prove the Silver Legion wasn't above justice. He approached Kaya with the confidence of someone holding irrefutable evidence. "Commander Voss, did you order the raid on House Morven on the night of June 14th? "I did. Were you aware the estate contained non-combatants? Intelligence suggested minimal non-combatant presence. We targeted operational hours when the family was typically absent. But you didn't verify before attacking. Complete verification was impossible without compromising operational security. We made tactical decisions based on available intelligence." Darius moved closer. Tactical decisions that resulted in an 8-year-old girl burning to death. A child who was visiting her grandmother. A child who had nothing to do with trafficking or military engagement. Kaya's jaw tightened. "Yes." "Do you regret that decision?" The courtroom went silent. Every observer leaned forward. Kaya looked at the mother sitting in the gallery, the woman holding her daughter's portrait. "Yes," Kaya said quietly. "I regret every civilian casualty, every child who died, every family destroyed by operations I commanded." Her voice strengthened. "But I don't regret the operations themselves. Those estates were trafficking centers, sites of systematic torture. Every day we delayed meant more Omegas sold and broken. I made tactical decisions that balanced saving the many against risking the few." She looked at Darius directly. "That doesn't absolve me, doesn't erase the casualties, doesn't make the dead children less dead. It just means I chose between impossible options and accepted that righteous action still creates harm." "So you admit guilt?" Kaya's expression was steady. "I admit responsibility. I ordered operations that resulted in civilian deaths. Whether that constitutes legal guilt depends on whether this court believes military necessity justifies those casualties." Darius smiled. "The court will decide exactly that." The closing arguments happened the next day. The prosecution argued that military necessity wasn't blank permission to kill civilians. The Kaya could have waited, gathered better intelligence, chosen different tactics that minimized risk. The defense argued that perfect information doesn't exist in warfare. The trafficking networks would have continued operating during delays. The Kaya made reasonable decisions under impossible circumstances. Both sides were right. Both sides were wrong. Because there was no clean answer. Just competing truths about justice and necessity and the terrible cost of trying to build something better. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They returned with a verdict that satisfied no one. Guilty on 8 counts. Acquitted on 9. The casualties where Kaya took reasonable precautions were ruled justified. The deaths that occurred despite warnings and evacuation opportunities were ruled acceptable military losses. But the 8-year-old who burned, the 12-year-old visiting his uncle, the civilians who died because intelligence was incomplete, those were ruled criminal negligence. The sentence was 15 years imprisonment. The courtroom erupted. Half the observers shouted that it was too lenient, that war criminals deserved death. The other half screamed that it was persecution, that holding military commanders accountable for wartime casualties set impossible precedent. Kaya stood silent through the chaos. Her face was calm, almost relieved, because accountability arrived. Not perfect, not clean, but genuine. She'd answer for harm caused. Not all of it, not more than reasonable. Just the specific instances where tactical decisions resulted in preventable deaths. Theron watched from the gallery and felt something settle in his chest he didn't expect. Peace. Not because the verdict was right or wrong, because justice happened. Messy, complicated, imperfect, but genuine. But slapes. The empire fractured anyway. Not immediately, not dramatically, but slowly, inevitably. The Silver Legion split. Half stayed with the empire. Half withdrew to southern territories to build independent communities. 3 territorial regions declared autonomy. Not rebellion, just gentle separation. Maintaining trade relations but refusing imperial authority. The carefully constructed coalition dissolved, and Theron stood in the throne room watching everything he built transform into something he barely recognized. Celine found him there 3 days after the verdict. He was sitting on the throne. Not commanding, not ruling, just existing in the space where absolute power used to live. "It's falling apart," he said quietly. "No," Celine replied. "It's evolving. The empire you built through control is dying. What's emerging is messier, more complicated. but potentially more sustainable. She sat beside him on the throne steps. You chose justice over maintaining coalition. You sent Kaya to trial, knowing it would cost you political stability. You proved accountability mattered